Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment where are you watching from and the time are watching this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story Night Shift at Harrington's gas station. I'd never been one to believe in the supernatural. Ghost stories, urban legends, all that stuff, none of it had ever held much sway over me. But after my first night as a security guard at this 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of town, I wasn't so sure anymore. It was supposed to be an easy gig, a late-night job to pay the bills. Nothing more than keeping an eye on the place, handling the occasional drunk driver or rowdy teen, and making sure no one wandered too far into the parking lot. At least, that's what I thought when I applied. Pay was decent, hours quiet, and the isolation didn't bother me. In fact, I preferred it. The gas station itself wasn't much to look at. A dingy building that sat at the edge of a long, winding road seemed to stretch into nothing. The main attraction was the bright fluorescent lights that flickered above the pumps and cast long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, it was just as unimpressive. Aisles of chips and snacks, a small refrigerator stocked with energy drinks and sodas, and a counter where my coworker Ray sat behind the register. Ray was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, and had the look of a man who'd spent too many years on the night shift. His skin was pale, his hair thinning, and his eyes had that glazed-over, distant look that made me wonder if he ever really slept. He'd been at the gas station for years, or so he told me on my first night, and he didn't say much else unless he had to. Tonight, as I clocked in and grabbed my flashlight, Ray was sitting behind the counter, sipping from a cup of coffee and staring out into the parking lot. He nodded at me when I came in, but didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. "How's the night been so far?" I asked, trying to make some small talk. Ray took a long sip of his coffee before answering, his voice gravely from too many cigarettes. "Quiet, just how I like it." "Anything I should know about?" I asked, settling in for what I thought would be an uneventful night. Ray's eyes flicked toward me, then back to the parking lot. "Yeah, actually," he said slowly. "There are a few things you should know. Rules, mostly. The kind that'll keep you out of trouble." I raised an eyebrow. "Rules? Like what?" Ray glanced over his shoulder as if making sure no one else was listening, and leaned in a bit closer. "I'll tell you about them through the night," said. "It's easier that way. Some things you just need to experience to understand." I was about to ask him what he meant when he added, "And one more thing, don't ask too many questions." The night passed slowly. The hours seemed to drag on, and apart from the occasional car pulling in to fill up, nothing much happened. I made my rounds around the parking lot, checked the perimeter, and kept an eye on the pumps. Ray stayed behind the counter, always watching, always sipping his coffee. It wasn't until around 1 a.m. when Ray suddenly cleared his throat. "There's something you need to know about," he said, his voice low and serious. "First rule." I stopped mid-step and turned toward him. "Yeah?" "If you see a little boy come in," Ray continued, "around 7 or 8 years old, wearing a red jacket, don't talk to him. Don't even acknowledge him. Just let him do what he does and leave. He comes around sometimes, usually late at night, but whatever you do, don't speak to him. If he asks you for help, ignore him." I stared at Ray, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. He was dead serious. "What happens if I talk to him?" I asked. Ray didn't look at me. "You don't want to know," he muttered. I didn't press him further, but the thought of a little boy wandering around the gas station in the middle of the night was unsettling enough. A few hours later, after another lull in activity, Ray spoke up again. "Second rule," he said without looking at me. I was restocking the drinks in the cooler. I stopped, listening. "Stay out of the shadows," Ray continued. "If the lights flicker and go out, stay where it's lit. Don't walk into the dark corners. You might see things moving in the dark, shadows that don't belong to anything. Whatever you do, don't follow them. They'll lead you somewhere you can't come back from." I glanced out the window at the flickering parking lot lights. They were old, barely working half the time. But Ray's tone made me uneasy. "Have you seen the shadows?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. Ray shrugged, sipping his coffee. "Once or twice. Don't care to see him again. Around 3 a.m., the gas station was completely silent. No customers, no cars, just the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I was getting restless when Ray spoke up again. Third rule, said. That door in the back of the station, the one marked employees only, don't open it. Don't knock on it. Don't go near it. Just ignore it. It's better that way. I frowned, looking toward the back of the station. There was a door there, old and scratched up, with a faded sign that read, Employees Only. I hadn't paid much attention to it before. What's behind it? I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew Ray's answer. Don't know. Don't care to find out, Ray replied, but sometimes you'll hear noises coming from back there. Scratching, tapping, maybe even voices. Ignore it. The door stays closed. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. The hours dragged on. It was nearing 4 a.m., and fatigue was starting to set in. The hum of the gas station's lights, the soft hum of the refrigerator units, and Ray's occasional cryptic advice were all that kept me company. That's when Ray hit me with the fourth rule. Last thing you need to know for now, he said, his voice just above a whisper. The light in the parking lot, the big one near the pumps, make sure it stays on. If it goes out, you need to fix it right away. I raised an eyebrow. What happens if it goes out? Ray set his coffee cup down and gave me a hard look. If it goes out, they'll come, and you don't want them coming. I didn't ask who they were. Sometime after 4 a.m., the gas station felt wrong. I was stocking shelves when I noticed Ray wasn't behind the counter anymore. I hadn't seen him leave or heard him move. It was as if he had vanished. Ray? Called out, stepping toward the counter. No answer. I looked around the gas station, checking the aisles, the bathrooms, and even the perimeter outside. But there was no sign of him. The back door remained shut, the shadows in the far corners of the station dark and foreboding. I felt a rising sense of dread. Ray was nowhere to be found. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me, and a chill crept up my spine. Suddenly, I remembered one of the rules, the shadows. I stayed under the fluorescent lights, avoiding the dark corners, my heart racing. I didn't know if I'd broken a rule by looking for him, but something told me I had. The parking lot light flickered. My stomach lurched, and I sprinted outside, fumbling with the switch on the side of the building. After a few agonizing seconds, the light sputtered back to life. The parking lot bathed in that familiar glow, and I exhaled, my hands shaking. When I went back inside, Ray was there, sitting behind the counter like he'd never left. Where the hell did you go? I demanded, my voice louder than I'd intended. Couldn't find you anywhere. Ray didn't look up from his coffee. You shouldn't have looked for me. What? That's the last rule, he said, his voice low and tired. If I disappear, don't look for me. The thing that comes back won't be me. Don't talk to it, don't acknowledge it, just pretend it's not there. I stared at him, my blood running cold. What the hell are you talking about? Ray finally looked up at me, his eyes empty, devoid of any emotion. You broke the rule. My heart pounded in my chest, confusion and fear swirling inside me. Was he messing with me? How could this thing be telling me not to talk to it if it wasn't Ray? I backed away slowly, my mind racing. If this wasn't Ray, then what was it? Why would it warn me about itself? The shadows in the corners of the station seemed to shift, growing darker, stretching toward me. The parking lot light flickered again, and this time I didn't move. I was frozen, caught between disbelief and terror. It was like the shadows were alive, moving, slithering, coiling closer and closer. My mind raced, screaming at me to stay in the light, to follow Ray's rules. But my legs felt like lead, my body unwilling to respond as the darkness seemed to wrap itself around the corners of the store. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, like the station itself was groaning under the weight of something unseen. The flickering of the parking lot light became more erratic, casting brief, harsh flashes across the interior. In the back of my mind, I remembered what Ray had said about the lights. They go out, they'll come. You don't want them coming. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. My body jerked into action as I ran for the switch that controlled the parking lot lights. My fingers fumbled with the old rusted lever on the wall, and for a moment, my heart nearly stopped as I realized it wasn't working. The hum intensified, and the shadows seemed to surge forward, creeping across the floor like liquid night. With a desperate grunt, I yanked the switch harder. The parking lot lights sputtered back to life, bright and glaring, chasing the shadows back into the corners. I collapsed against the wall, panting, my heart hammering against my ribcage. The light was on, and the shadows had retreated. But the station didn't feel any safer. I could still feel them, watching, waiting for the light to fail again. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me wondered if the light was the only thing holding them back. And then there was Ray, or whatever was pretending to be him, sitting behind the counter, sipping his coffee as if nothing had happened. The weight of his final rule sat heavily on my mind. The thing that comes back won't be me. Don't talk to it. Don't acknowledge it. Was this really happening? Had I broken the rule? Or had Ray, or the thing wearing his skin, lied to me? My hands trembled as I stood there, staring at him. Felt like a twisted game. He had returned, informed me of a rule that might not even apply anymore, and then gone back to his coffee like none of it mattered. I took a few shaky steps forward, and that's when the next event happened. A soft chime echoed through the gas station. The door had opened. I hadn't seen it move. There hadn't been a car pulling up to the pumps, but when I turned around, I saw him. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, just like Ray had described. His red jacket stood out in the dim fluorescent glow of the station, too bright, too vivid for the otherwise washed-out world of the night. He stood by the door, looking around as if lost, his eyes wide and pleading. Every instinct screamed at me to help him. It didn't feel right, just standing there, pretending he wasn't there, pretending I didn't hear the quiet sniffle of a child trying to hold back tears. But Ray's warning burned in the back of my mind. If you see a boy in a red jacket, don't talk to him. Don't acknowledge him. The boy took a few tentative steps into the store, his small hands fidgeting with the zipper of his jacket. He was looking right at me. "Mister?" His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Can you help me? I can't find my mom." My throat tightened. I glanced at Ray, or whatever was pretending to be him. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted at all to the boy's presence. It was like he couldn't even see him. The boy took another step closer. "Please, I'm scared." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to follow the rule. My pulse raced, my mind fighting between the human instinct to help a child and the primal fear that told me something was deeply wrong. The temperature in the station seemed to drop, the fluorescent lights buzzing ominously overhead. My hands trembled as I focused on keeping still. The boy sniffled again. "Why won't you help me?" His voice was louder now, almost accusatory. "Please." Tears welled in his wide eyes, and he reached out toward me. That's when I saw it. Flicker, the momentary slip. His face didn't change at first, but in the dim light, I saw his eyes flash, just for a second, with something that wasn't human. Something cold and hollow. The smile that had started to creep across his lips was wrong. Too wide, too sharp. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The boy let out a soft whimper, his face contorting with mock sadness. "Why won't you help me?" His voice had changed. It wasn't the voice of a child anymore. There was something deeper, something older beneath it. The words echoed, bouncing off the walls of the station. I turned away, refusing to look at him, ignoring the chill that crept down my spine as his footsteps echoed softly across the floor. The sound of his movement grew quieter until, finally, the door chimed again. He was gone. I leaned against the counter, my nerves frayed, my mind racing. Ray, or the thing that looked like Ray, sat there watching me. He didn't say anything about the boy, just sipped his coffee, his eyes distant and glazed. I glanced toward the back of the store, where the employees-only door loomed like a dark shadow at the end of the hallway. I hadn't noticed it before tonight, but now it felt like the focal point of everything wrong in this place. The faintest sound reached my ears, a soft scratching, barely audible over the hum of the station's lights. My heart skipped a beat. Ray had warned me about the door. Don't open it. Don't knock. Don't go near it. The sound continued, persistent and unsettling. It wasn't just scratching anymore. There was a faint tapping, like knuckles against wood. A soft, rhythmic knock. My feet felt glued to the floor. I couldn't move, couldn't even look away from the door. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, and my breath caught in my throat. I wasn't supposed to go near it. Something was there. Something was behind that door, and every second that passed felt like it was pulling me toward it. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. Silence hung in the air, thick and oppressive. I exhaled, the tension in my chest easing just slightly. But then the door creaked. It wasn't much, just the faintest movement, as if someone had leaned against it from the other side. The knob didn't turn. The door didn't open, but it moved. A voice, quiet and low, drifted through the door. "Let me out." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was faint, muffled, but it was unmistakable. Something was behind that door. Ray's warning echoed in my mind. "The door stays closed." I turned back toward the front of the store, but Ray, if that was even still him, hadn't moved. He stared ahead blankly, as if oblivious to the sounds, oblivious to me. The door creaked again, and the voice grew louder. "Please, let me out." My legs moved on instinct. I bolted for the front of the station, my mind screaming at me to get away from that door, get as far from it as I could. I made my way to the front door, taking in gulps of the cold night air as soon as I stepped outside. The parking lot lights flickered above me, but this time I wasn't going to leave them unchecked. Couldn't afford another close call with the shadows. Couldn't afford anything else. I stayed close to the lights, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear, my mind swirling with questions. Who or what was behind that door? What had happened to Ray, and was the thing behind the counter really him? And why had the boy looked at me like that? Those cold, hollow eyes? The sky began to lighten just slightly. Dawn wasn't far off. I just had to make it through the night. But as I stood there, keeping my eyes on the station's entrance, something else started to feel wrong. Fluorescent lights inside the store flickered, just for a second, but long enough for me to see it. Ray wasn't sitting behind the counter anymore. The chair was empty. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I scanned the parking lot. There was no sign of him, no sign of anyone. I turned back toward the store, trying to make sense of it all. And then the door creaked open behind me. Slowly, cautiously, I turned around. Ray, or something that looked like him, stood in the doorway, staring at me with a blank expression. His eyes were glassy, distant, his skin pale. He didn't move, didn't speak. I froze, remembering the last rule he'd given me. Don't talk to it. Don't acknowledge it. My mouth went dry. This wasn't Ray. Couldn't be. But if it wasn't, then what was it doing there? And why had it come back? It took a step toward me, and I backed away, keeping my eyes on the figure. It wasn't him. Couldn't be him. The sun's first rays finally broke over the horizon. Pale light spilling into the parking lot. Kept my distance, edging toward my car, refusing to take my eyes off the figure standing in the gas station's doorway. The night was over. I had made it through. But as I drove away, leaving the gas station behind, the feeling of unease stayed with me. I couldn't shake the thought. If that thing wasn't Ray, why did it tell me the rules? And more importantly, what else was it hiding from me? That was my last night at the gas station, and I don't plan on ever going back. But don't relax just yet. The worst is yet to come in our next story. I accidentally made a hole through my wall. I looked through it and saw myself looking back. At least, that's what I think it was. You know the moment when you're at the top of a roller coaster? You know the feeling of the first 3-4 seconds of the drop? As much as you adrenaline junkies say it's amazing, don't lie, it's absolutely awful, terrifying. That's how I felt 2 hours ago. Clink. I live in one of these duplex type of homes, a house split in two. One side mine, the other the neighbor's. For right now, no one's. No one lives next to me. It's for sale. Don't imagine it's something fancy. I've rented it out to have more room for my painting. It has a simple layout. Downstairs, my living room and kitchen, with a tiny service bathroom. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, one mine, the other turned into a painting room, because I can't sleep in the smell of oil paint. I was hanging up some paintings in the upstairs hallway, the one that shares a wall with the other home. As I raised my hand with the nail and my hammer, I tripped, which was odd by itself because I never trip on thin air, and, since my hand was already swinging, I quickly pulled my other hand with the nail away, afraid to hit my finger. My hammer went straight into the wall. Cardboard walls, typical to cheap American homes. I stood there in silence, staring like an idiot at the hole I'd just made. I hadn't expected the wall to be so thin, so that I could see the darkness from the other home. It was extremely odd and off-putting. I hated living next to no one. That home had been for sale for ages. In the silence, I suddenly heard movement on the other side. Confusion, then fear, then disgust swept over me. Please, no rats. It's all I ask. Hesitant, I peeked through the hole, trying to see the culprit. The other room definitely needed to have windows, so the darkness would not be too bad, I thought. Still, my mind was fuzzy. How on earth did I manage to break into the other home? How? I knew the term paper-thin walls, but I'd assumed that was just an exaggeration. In that moment, I know I wasn't the wisest. It wasn't exactly the best decision to put my eye right into the opening of a stale, dusty room. Even if there were rats, that made it even more unsanitary. Those were the thoughts playing in my head, which were cut short all of a sudden. I pulled away, eyes wide, mouth open, scarcely breathing. There it was, the drop of the roller coaster. Well enough, I'd seen another eye looking back. The house was silent, but not a welcoming silence, or a comforting one, the one I'd gotten to know since living alone. No, this silence was like a being on its own. I felt it moving through my walls, and I feared it wasn't the only one. Blink. How do I know it was me who was looking back? Well, I have a scar on my left eyelid. Walked into a wire when I was a kid. Lucky it didn't blind me. 2 hours ago, I'd seen that same scar through the wall. My mind raced for answers. It's a mirror. It's a fucking mirror. That's what it had to be. The other room had a double-sided mirror on the wall. I put my finger through the hole, expecting to feel the glass. I felt skin. I think I've never screamed so loud before in my life. No, first, I think I gagged. I'm trying to remember the right order of things, but I can't. My throat is still sore from that scream. I could not think of a reasonable thing to do, because that wasn't a reasonable situation. What if it was a dead body? No, I'd heard it moving. I've been pacing through my living room since. I've stopped to type this, hoping someone might know how to help. Clink. From time to time I hear this sound. Clink, coming from the hole. The first time I heard it was an hour ago. It was almost imperceptible. Now, it's the same sound, but I feel like it's become deafening. I turn to look, and I see that whoever is on the other side is dropping pins on my floor, through that hole. Clink. A pin falls, followed by another. I don't know what's scarier. The fact that someone is on the other side, me perhaps, or the fact that it knows I saw it. It's a really thin wall, and I'm afraid something can break through it from any side. Tonight I'm sleeping at my friend's. Tomorrow, I don't know what I'll do. Wish me luck. As I'm zipping my back up to leave, I hear another clink. I turn, and from the door, I can see an eye peeking through the hole in the wall. I get into my car. I'll hit post now, then fire up the engine and get out of here. I have one more thing to say. The upstairs room, the one stuck to my home, the one where the hole is supposed to lead, has no windows. I don't know what's in there, and how long it's been lurking. I don't even want to think about the fact that for the last year, I've been living next to that thing. But what came next, no one could have prepared for. The night I became a father, been 2 weeks since what happened. The cold moonlight glistening off my wife's gleaming smile and glistening off her black orbs of eyes, cradled in her arms, its eyes, vacuous yet infinite, hosting some primordial presence, its origin not of this world. I had taken a glance into the void of the eyes, and something looked back at me. The night replays in my head every waking moment since then, in such intense detail. I had considered the possibility I was just going plain insane. I had a loving wife and child, and my mom lied to me. There was never any miscarriage. There was no Daryl to be a year ago, just Daryl from 4 months ago. That night must have been some horrible, hyper-realistic dream. Of course, I was bullshitting myself. It was all too real, all too vivid. As I maintained my facade around Clara and the entity, my mind would race with question. But one question raised itself higher among others. What the fuck happened between the miscarriage a year ago, 4 months ago? Any attempt at remembering resulted in the same mundane memories resurfacing. Working, watching movies with Clara at home, generally just living life as normal. When asked, Clara would say the same. Yet there was some cloudiness, a murkiness, above it all, film that hung over it, blurring the image of my memory. The mundane had blended together in such a nondescript way, and no single event stood out from its fog. I found it hard to believe absolutely nothing of note took place in that time. And then poof, suddenly we have a child. I then got the idea that whatever this thing is, if it could brainwash my wife, who's to say it can't alter memory too? I had checked my phone gallery between that time. I figured this would be a decent way to find anything, as I'm not the sort to go through old pictures in my gallery often. All the pictures were that of the mundane I described before. Pretty clouds, good food, me and Clara doing what husband and wife do. But Clara looked off. Her smiles looked sad, forced. Some deep sadness had burrowed itself into her eyes, kind of sadness that transcends expression. I could feel it when I looked at her, even through the screen. This wasn't definitive, though. That sadness was likely spawned from the miscarriage, but I was still operating on assumption. There had to be something in the house to prove the miscarriage. Doctor's report, pictures, anything. I was hoping for anything real and substantial to pierce the fog in my head. I checked older medical documents from last year's 8th of May, which would have been Daryl's original date of birth. No records indicative of a miscarriage or complications whatsoever. Did it make Clara destroy the documents? It wasn't out of the question, seeing as how much of a grip it had over her already. And then I found it. Polaroid picture stashed away in a drawer in the bedroom. It was that of a starry night sky, a brilliant white moon in its center. Silhouettes of pine trees bordered the frame of the picture, faintly illuminated by a warm orange glow, likely from a campfire. It was at that moment that the fog cleared. The veil obscuring my memory had been torn apart. All it took was a single Polaroid pic. That night, me and Clara went camping in the woods. It was one of her favorite activities before the miscarriage. She was so stricken with grief after the miscarriage that she had relegated herself to 2 places, her office and her home. I hoped this trip would bring some life back in her eyes. She always loved the beauty of the natural world. We hiked the trail until we reached where we planned to make camp. Cozy clearing, surrounded by magnificent pine trees. We set up our tent and put together a modest campfire beside it, along with a convenient log nearby, which would serve as seating. We threw in some loose dead wood to serve as kindling. As the sun began to set, me and Clara sat on the log, her head on my shoulder, my head against hers, bundled in the same blanket that we bundled Daryl in. We watched the fire dance as it crackled and snapped. Clara let out a relieved, relaxed sigh, as if everything would be all right in the end as she burrowed her head into me. We would stay there, just sitting, for a while. I remember thinking how I wouldn't mind just staying like that, forever. "You want to talk about what's on your mind?" I said, stroking her hair. "Just hoping that one day I'll be able to go back to normal. That I'll be able to feel like something wasn't ripped straight out of my chest. That this empty pit will ever be filled again. I just wanted to write by Daryl so bad. And now I may never be able to have a child. Ever. Clara, but I still have you." She looked up at me, her eyes full of that light again and a smile, a genuine warm smile that could melt a glacier. She leaned in to give me a peck on the lips and continued to rest against me. We looked to the sky that was now a tapestry of black speckled with white, and in the middle of it all, the moon hanging proud and regal over us. That was when I took the picture that made me remember all this. Before we dozed off by the fire, as cozy as we were, we figured it would be best to sleep in the tent. We dragged ourselves, half asleep, from the campfire into the tent and laid ourselves to bed for the night. It was a peaceful night's sleep. Until it wasn't. A loud crash from what sounded like just outside our tent woke me and Clara up. I was still stunned, laying down in my sleeping bag as Clara jolted up and went to investigate. By the time I made my way out of the tent, Clara was standing right beside it, an impact crater right where our campfire was. Pale, perfectly spherical object no bigger than a beach ball lay embedded into the earth at its center. Clara stood over it, staring at it, unmoving. "Clara, what is that?" "He's beautiful." He began to walk towards the object, arms outstretched. "Clara, don't. Get away from it." I ran towards her, grabbed her by the shoulders, and turned her away and towards me. Her eyes were black pearls. She wore that same content smile she had that night. Why would I run away from our child? I don't know if the sheer shock weakened my grip, or if in that moment Clara had gained some otherworldly strength, but she effortlessly ripped herself away from my grip and continued into the crater, arms still outstretched, as she made her way down its slopes. The orb began to hover in response to Clara's approach, levitating at most 5 feet off the ground. It began to reshape itself, twisting, contorting, and folding over itself in ways non-Euclidean, in ways that defied logic and physics. Its texture shifting from a glossy metallic to that more akin to human skin. It's like it had just changed itself on a wholly molecular level. As it continued to morph into its perfect final shape, I could feel a strange ache in the back of my head as I continued to look at it, as if something was probing my mind, digging around, searching for something. Even remembering it now, I feel that similar ache in the back of my head. A magnetism stopped me from looking away, and the ache got worse. The object took the shape of a newborn baby, of Daryl, small and frail, still hovering above the ground. Clara pulled off the blanket that was still wrapped around her and gently swaddled Daryl in it. She turned slowly to face me. It was just like that night. Her face bathed in moonlight, the black, abyssal eyes. Daryl staring straight into me, with those eyes that contained something unfeeling yet sinister deep within. It took all I had to look away, to go against this force pulling my gaze towards Daryl. I could feel my psyche breaking, who I was, and all common sense, being overwritten by some other power. Visions of cataclysm seeped in through my mind. A world in flames. A pale orb resembling the moon above it all. Every synapse fired off, every nerve shot with pain, as I ripped my gaze away from the entity. The shock made me pass out and collapse onto the floor, unconscious. That was it, the moment my memory broke. Damage done from interrupting the entity's attempt at controlling me. It was also the moment I had become a father. The next day, I woke up to Clara and Daryl seated at the table, ready for breakfast. I assumed that this was my life. After all, why would I question it? I always wanted a loving wife and a beautiful baby boy, even if I had no memory of the night before, and even if the past 9 months were a blur. This was happiness. And now, 4 months later, I wish I could have maintained that ignorance. My wife was having her deepest desires exploited by some eldritch being, and I have no idea what the fuck to do. But the darkness doesn't end there. Our next tale dives even deeper into the unknown. My friend's been missing for 10 years. I think I found him. Hi, my name's Simon and I don't believe in the supernatural. I've never been spiritual or anything like that. I don't care if someone else holds those beliefs, but it's just never penetrated my human experience. It's always felt like the world is a flow of motion, and one day your motion just stops. I think my friend is still alive up there. Maybe he's become mentally ill from being up there so long. I don't really know. I felt really hesitant even making this post, but there's not a lot of options, I guess. I'll start from the beginning. I will not disclose any specific details, but I live in the Northwest. My family and I moved up here from New Mexico when I was only 5 years old. It couldn't have been better for me. I found my love of nature, hiking, hunting, and fishing. All things that weren't a huge attraction back home. The massive trees and the river systems carving their ways through the dense rocky terrain. I love it up here. Even school wasn't too bad. It had its ups and downs. Exes, bullies, fights, high school drama. But really my life was good and fairly one note, until my friend went missing. 10 years ago when we were in sophomore year, the class took a field trip to a nearby mountain range. It was a hiker's paradise out there. Beautiful, and lots of bald spots, so getting lost was much less likely. They even had a trail that went up to a pioneer's cabin. It was a really cute spot I'd visit in later years. My best friend's name was Clark. Our friendship began in junior year and prospered in high school, mostly because we had the same taste in music. Alt-rock, and yes to all you metalheads. I did listen to Tool and some Machine Head. I branched out, but alt-rock is just what we landed on, so forgive me. It really felt like the glue that held us together was music. We talked on and on about the different bands we loved, argued to death on their worst albums. We were even discussing starting our own band. But alas, Valley Boys was not meant to be. I remember it all so vividly. Not just the moment, but all the little stuff leading up to it. All these years, and it still hasn't left me. Why hasn't it left me? On the bus ride, we were arguing about MCR's new compilation album, May Death Never Stop You. Both agreeing we were hoping for a whole new album, not some combination of a bunch of old hits. Clark said, I mean, yeah, I like the sound they have, but it's time they branched out. I was arguing. You had a money winner like that, why would you ever change it? Thought for a bit as the bus jostled. Because I have dignity. You'll have dignity in a cardboard box then. I chuckled. He bit back the smile that was starting to form on his face. So, Captain Shameless, have you talked to Julie yet? That was a sore spot back then. Okay, I still have trouble, but not nearly as bad as then. I had a streak for being absolutely petrified of women. Every time I got close, I would sweat and forget how to string together a coherent sentence. Clark, on the other hand, was a smooth operator. Well, that's what I thought in high school. Looking back, he may have just figured out that confidence was key much earlier than most of us. I'll do it on this trip, I said much too confidently. I blew the long strands of brown hair out of my face. Oh, she's right over there. I darted my eyes over to the seat behind us, where two boys sat. Dick, I slapped him with my red baseball cap. I looked down and noticed that Clark was wearing a Metallica shirt, uncharacteristic of his usual tastes. However, it fit his dark visage. Shaggy black hair, brown eyes, tall. Traitor, I thought. He looked down at his shirt, then me, and smirked. I just think the album cover is cool. Chill out, Simon. We settled into our normal talks, but I could see something was distracting him. I should have asked him. I just should have asked him. Clark wasn't easily distracted. He lived in the moment. I lived in my head. That's how we worked. But it wasn't working that day. What was he thinking about? God, what was he thinking about? The bus bounced and hopped through the little valley town, up and through to the destination. It was miles of fields, and I thought maybe I wouldn't mind living there. But how could I be a famous musician and a mountain man? Seemed those things did not mix. Humans like to put things into neat little boxes. The contents all have to make sense. If you start mixing them, people get confused. When you're confused, you feel stupid. Nobody likes to feel stupid. So people will spill out the contents of themselves, just to stick with something more organized. Nobody except Clark knew I hunted. I loved camping on the weekends. Nature was my getaway. Music was the art I listened to, away from the noise of buildings and cities. The bus rose up, dragging itself up the black asphalt road until we parked into that little dirt lot. Signs and boulders outlining where we would begin our trek. I kept appearances with a Pearl Jam shirt and some torn jeans. But I wasn't dumb enough to bring sneakers on a 2-hour hike. I made sure Clark didn't make the mistake either. He tied them like bunny ears instead of cross-hatching, which annoyed me beyond measure. I looked over the woods. Browns were more of the state than greens. Dry dirt that rose into bark that struck odd shapes into trees. I could see animals and screaming faces carved into the surface. Those woods were a drawing siren inside a sea of green and brown. Kids spilled out laughing and joking. I saw lots of sneakers. Our teacher was Mr. Drytouth. People called him Dry Mouth because he was old and rasped out words. Our decrepit protector said, "All right, children, we're going to be hiking," as though the sign wasn't right in front of us. Naturally, being such a closeted hiker, I did my research on the trail. I knew the place was already a mistake. According to all the sources I could find, it was considered a severe hike, almost 20 kilometers total. Obviously, he didn't plan to take us the whole way, but even a quarter of the way was too much for a bunch of sophomore kids. I joked with Clark that all the pretty sneakers would have puke on them by the end. He didn't laugh. He instead stared wistfully at the trail. I ignored his silence and eyed the perimeter of the parking lot. Few other cars parked there, a beat-up old red Chevy, a gray Tundra, and an old yellow Corvette. Me and my infinite paranoia was wondering what kind of people would be hiking the severe trail. We started on our ascent. I remember that the sun was hot as fuck that day. It was suffocating. I brought a big water jug and was glad of it. The trail radiated heat. Crawling through the ass crack of two mountains pressed together. Trees started to press closer, like they were trying to lull us deeper into the thick embrace of Mother Nature. I really can't say if it's the context of what happened, or if I really felt like it at the time, but it felt awful out there, like I was a wounded animal going off to perish somewhere alone. I handed the jug over to Clark, making sure he took a big gulp. I looked up and saw Julie lagging behind. "All right, cowboy, now's your chance." He jabbed. You've got a sweat stain on your ass." Clark whipped around, and before he realized my ruse, I half fell towards Julie. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah. So sweaty out here, right?" "What?" "The sun, it's sunny." "Yeah." I ran back to Clark before I could suffer the burning gaze of her any longer. I was shaking, my whole body trembling as if ready to receive a beating. "What happened?" he asked. From the shame on my face, he knew to drop it, to just let that interaction fall to the ground and melt in the hot sun. Clark started tapping his leg rhythmically, staring out around the outcropping our class found ourselves on. There were steep hills to either side, bare of most trees. We passed a large boulder when I noticed Clark's incessant tapping. "Thinking a new song up?" He looked over and smiled weakly. "It's been coming together." "Any actual guitar playing?" I said. "I've been thinking piano, actually." "Really?" "Yes, Simon. Piano. Pianos have a lot of range. The range at which it will keep you from women is an impressive distance." He laughed at that, and people turned around to look. I would have been embarrassed if my head wasn't so full of heat. Sweat lingering in my vision as we walked through another cropping of trees. We had been hiking for an hour when finally one of the girls began to sway. One of her friends caught her, and looking around realized there was no one to tell. Mr. Drymouth was gone. I guessed he had fallen behind. Some of the kids, too mature for their age, suggested we hike back down towards him. If we can't find him, to notify the bus driver. An actual level-headed plan I could get behind. We began the awkward, hot descent. Some of the other students began to grow nauseous. I didn't blame them. It was much too hot for a hike like that. I had no idea what the teacher had thought bringing us out there. Clark seemed especially bothered. I looked over to him. "Hey man, water? You can have the last drink." I sloshed the nectar around to drive home the point. I can't hear very well," he muttered. I'd never heard of a symptom like that for heat stroke. Maybe confusion. I told him we were halfway down the trail. Julie apparently heard me. "How do you know that, Simon?" he said with a tinge of annoyance. "Heat will do that." Oh. I remember this bend comes after the boulder we just passed, which was about halfway up." "Jesus, you have a good sense of direction," she said. I blushed before saying, "I have hiking boots." "What?" she said. The confusion was not caused by heat stroke. Clark turned. I see that face in distant flashes when I daydream. Sometimes when that personality that had been so integral to a younger me wanders back into perception. I see his face. I gasped. Morbid realization, maybe. But all his face told me was something was unimaginably wrong. So wrong. I feel sick now just thinking about what he said, just putting it into reality. "Something happened to Mr. Dritoth," said. I was completely perplexed by the oddity. A random mention? As though gifted knowledge not known to me. It was alien. "What?" He shook his head as if erasing confusion from his heat-rattled head. "Nobody else heard, my friend. Right now I'm thinking, why the fuck did he bring us out there that day? That fucking idiot. Even typing it gets me so pissed. He should be held responsible. He should have been held more responsible, I should be saying. Maybe I'd still be joking about musical instruments with Clark today. But not today. Or yesterday. Not for a long time. This heat is bad, Simon. You don't understand." He waved me off as if trying to wave off an apparition. I pressed him to tell me what he meant. That's when the girl passed out. She fell right on the ground in a heap. Panic began to ensue. Class of sophomore kids up on a heat-ridden mountain lost composure. Those more mature kids ran over to her quickly, opening her eyelids, feeling her neck for a pulse. I was frozen for a moment, watching it happen. I told myself the thing that every man thinks. They have enough people. They don't need me to help. Diffusing responsibility. They picked her up, and I turned to Clark, about to ask him if we should do something, like smoke. He had been next to me. Then he wasn't. He hadn't made a sound, hadn't told me anything. Had existed one moment, then the world swallowed him into its deepest, darkest pits. The forest was so quiet. I remembered everyone faded into the background. Someone attached to you at the hip is suddenly out of your awareness. I wonder how to describe that. Even now, even after counseling, even after soul-searching, there are things that fail to be interpreted by language, only apparent through sensation. Someone was in my life. Then they weren't. All in 10 seconds. I should have just kept looking at him. Couldn't have ran off. Anyways, all I thought at the time was, where is he going? Sadly, my naivete didn't wear off the first hour down, or the second. All the way to the bus stop, it didn't stop. Oh, he must be taking a piss up there. He'll be down. Oh, he must be lost. We'll find him. He must have bedded down for the night. The Rangers will get him. Then he'll come down. My friend is alive. I know it. Days after, hope still remained. When we arrived at the bus stop, Mr. Drytouth was being taken care of by the bus driver. I asked if Clark had been there. There was no reply. I asked if they would come help look. The bus driver could not leave everyone unattended. Can I go? I asked. No, we don't need anyone else unaccounted for. We waited an hour until they notified Rangers. There was nothing we could do. Drytooth was rambling. He was in no state to go look. He looked sick, and not just from the heat stroke. As the sun touched the tip of those mountains and the brights came on, the lights of the Rangers' ATVs worming their way up the mountain gave me the thought of uniformity failing. Watched, and maybe subconsciously I understood that no one was going to find him, that they were being careful instead of fast, that they were planning instead of doing. Maybe that's why I yelled at Mr. Drytouth. Why the fuck did you bring us up there? Everyone jumped. I was not the outspoken sort, for reasons made clear earlier. The teacher couldn't even respond. Not until he said, "Thank you." I tensed with deep, pained anger. Slowly, it shook off into a puddle of seething contempt. I stormed off towards the road and did my pacing. It was surreal. What was next? Going home. Place without someone who I had known since 8th grade. Who would push me out of my comfort zone? Who could I laugh with? I was completely taxed from that hellish hike. I wondered what was taking him so long. How could I accept that he was missing? But I did, because I was 15 years old and afraid to keep him alive in my memory. Without Clark, I leaned much harder into my hiking background. I spent most of my time alone, not friendless, but no best friend. I became well acquainted with fish and game. Even local rangers became well acquainted with me. So it really just made sense when I eventually became a guide. Mostly for other hunters, but now and again for families trying to see some sights. I really opened up when I was out in nature, so talking was much easier. Something about being responsible for others made me feel obligated to know them. Most of them I was glad to know. The pay isn't great, but the job is. So that's what I've been doing the last 3 or so years. I make it a habit to explore new trails. 1, because they can net me new customers, and 2, I love hiking. I think I've explained this. But I avoided one trail, no matter how close to the trails I was acquainted with. Still haunted me. Every once in a while I'd have a dream about Clark looking at me silently, just standing all lonesome in that trail. So I avoided it like the plague, kept on, until my girlfriend told me that I needed some exposure therapy. I fear she might be right. I am a strong believer in facing your fears, so the fact I let that path bother me for so long should showcase how fucking scared I was. I went anyways. She offered to come with me, but I told her I didn't want her to see me cry. I played it off like a joke, but who knows how I'd feel up there. I drove my 2015 Wrangler up. I crested over a hill and down into that sunny little valley town I had seen all those years ago. People as polite as ever, waving me through as though I were family. I slowed the Jeep the closer I got to the trailhead. I stopped at the entrance to the parking lot. My limbs were shaking. I hadn't seen anyone die. I hadn't been attacked. But why was I shaking like a leaf? It made me so mad I floored the pedal and lurched into the parking lot with a jolt. I put the car in park and slapped myself once. Easiest hike of my life, said, meeting my gaze in the rear view. Pressed the radio on until I got to the proper channel for weather alerts. I didn't hear anything, so I looked over to my little notepad list of the weather for the day. I'm going to write it down here since I have it still. 12 p.m. arrive at 275 F. There would be 5 miles per hour winds. At 380 F, no notable changes. 482 F, 5% chance of rain. 583, 10% chance of rain. Head back. I checked my watch and made sure it was working properly. I checked my bag for all of my essentials, including a map, PLB, water, MRE, hunting knife, metal bowl, fire starter, binoculars, and some snacks. Thorough, that was my motto. Also my Kimber K6S. I brushed my hand through my cropped brown hair, stretched my wide shoulders. All the hunting and hiking had made my thick build just a little stronger, but all the snacks balanced me out with a little bit of a gut. I took a few steps towards the trail mark. I was overcome with that feeling of dread. Only one other vehicle was in the parking lot, an old red Chevy. I reflexively let my hand lay on my holster, just for a sense of safety. I swallowed and began to make my trek. The new hiking boots I had bought were sleek and comfortable. That hike would decide if they were my lucky boots or if they were the shit boots. I made my way up. A slow, creeping sensation of fright scuttled its way up my legs. I stomped harder to try to shake the weakness spreading throughout my body. I forced myself to continue. I couldn't let that trail hold me. I had to be better than that. Soon there was some winds. I looked at my watch. 2:05 p.m. I nodded to myself. Coming to an outcropping, I sat on a tree stump and stared out at the valley and down below. A beautiful creek ran far below. Far, far below. My eyes stared and made out a figure crouched down at the edge of it. I looked over to my bag and got my binoculars out. I stared down into the valley and there was a man, in full fishing gear looking quite worn. Definitely a bushman. He didn't look like he had left the forest for some years. He casting a net along the river, and I remarked that it was illegal. But pressing a poacher out in the middle of the bush was how people went missing. So I ignored it, standing up instead. I looked one more time at the man with the massive bushy beard. Damn, I thought. He had actually caught a fish. It flapped onto shore and the man stood on it. I was expecting him to just step on its head and kill it. He instead took his knife and began cutting its tail off. I groaned as he began to cut it back to front. Fish, still breathing. He would just sit there watching it. He'd cut up, then watch it twitch until the thing finally passed on to whatever fish god it belonged to. The man calmly washed his hands off before casting the net back out. All pieces of the fish just lay behind him on the bank, cooking in the sun. I left that spot, determining that the trail was clearly just cursed with weird shit. Honestly shook me. I wondered then if this was one of those creepy-ass towns where everyone is in on something not understood to the confused traveler. I loved those movies. Clouds rolled over the shining sun and suddenly the shade came to me. Not that I was complaining. Well, maybe complaining a little, thinking it might actually rain with only a supposed 5 to 10% chance. That's when I passed the large boulder. It was the one that marked the halfway point to where I had last seen Clark. It wasn't a 5-mile marker anymore. It was a gravestone of sorts. I rubbed my hand over my face, and when I closed my eyes, I saw Clark in the darkness. I opened them, quickly slapping myself again and again. I rushed up the mountain, letting my irritation propel me further. I took out my drink and looked down at it. The life of my body contained in a little metal cylinder. I drank. I kept up, rethinking all the things I had explained earlier. Of the past, that moment in my mind, Mr. Drytooth is in trouble, I said absent-mindedly. I looked up and saw the path forward was one I had not gone to before. I looked back and saw the quiet trees Clark had supposedly ran into. My skin tightened like a deer pelt over a drum. My heart thudded in my chest and I was still. To move higher on the mountain was suicide. Every inch of my body was rigid. It would not let me go any farther. I have trouble regurgitating this information. It feels like I'm back again. I don't want to be back again. I looked up the hill, then looked back. A figure with long black hair and a band T had their back turned to me as they walked back into the tree line. It was so nonchalant. It was over so quickly. I gripped my chest as my heart's normal rhythmic state trembled in awkward stiletto. "Hello?" I said, not really knowing any other words. I walked back down, and there were footprints. Real footprints. I followed. Thoughts swam through my consciousness. Did he run away? Has he been lost this entire time? Am I hallucinating? A random person? I ran after the footprint. They disappeared into the tree line. I burst through, stopping just before a steep hill. I shook my head, realizing that the trail was obviously lost. "Clark, where are you?" I yelled. My voice echoed in the empty valley, and I was left with nothing but hopelessness to fill the silence. It sounds stupid. It could be anyone, but I can't shake the fact that it felt like him. Even the strut was so oddly familiar. Everything about it. I couldn't climb any higher, so I hiked back down. I felt the odd sense of primal sickness. as though my ancestors were warning me of a predator very near. My skin crawled and my perception widened. I noticed it. Someone was out of breath. I looked back up the trail. The breathing became steadier as I stopped. I put my hand at my holster. "Hey, make yourself known," I said, trying to keep the tremble from my voice. Breathing turned into some kind of rasping. I tried to listen. The wind picked up and rain trickled down. I thought my fears were very warranted in that moment. I pulled my gun out and began to walk down the trail, keeping an eye behind me. The noise faded into the fuzz of rain. I rounded a corner, and on the ground I saw Clark's band T. My face contorted as if it was going to rip with the force of my expression. "Who are you? Come out, motherfucker." "You know me," said, so close to the nape of my neck that it felt like the voice had crawled up my spinal cord. I whipped around, cocking the hammer. No one. I turned back and something metal struck my head. A dull, vibrating ring sounded, and I was down on the ground. I pawed for my gun, my sense of balance alien. I could see the figure with the dark, long hair digging through my pack in doubles. I yelled, rolling in awkward waves of pain. I mustered the last bit of sense I had and yelled, tackling them, sending us into a muddy heap. We tumbled down the trail near one of the steeper ledges, and I held them down with my stocky build. I pulled the gun to their face, and suddenly my mind went white, like someone had wiped it clean of all experience. Sense of past, future, and present left me. Their visage had been completely masked, and I had been stunned. I woke up in the same spot, no one there. Rain pouring now. I clawed my way up that muddy bank, and there I found my pack. I stumbled down the mountain, a ghost looking for familiarity. I tried to find my truck in my damaged state. I looked over in the parking lot and saw an old red truck. The drive home was dangerous, to say the least. The whole experience shook me pretty bad. And I'm pretty upset with my girlfriend right now. She's insisting that it's a hallucination brought on by trauma. We've been arguing about it for the last few hours. She says the damage could have been me, just rolling around. To that I would say, why is my hunting knife missing then? Why would I hallucinate so intensely that I would throw my own knife away as a trauma response? Makes no sense. Just like the dreams, I've been waking up screaming recently. I don't remember the dreams, I only remember phrases from within them. One that keeps coming back is, bottom to top. My girlfriend wants to come with me next time, to see with her own eyes how I am not hallucinating. The rain washed the scuffle away. The band T is probably gone. And for obvious reasons, I wouldn't bring a 145-pound woman with me when there's a violent thing up on a mountaintop somewhere. But even if that all were not true, there's one more simple reason why I could never bring her to... Something was unlocked on that mountain. I'm starting to remember why I'm so afraid of that mountain. My friend's been missing for 10 years. I think I found him. When you're younger, memories are like turbulent water that either bubble to the surface or are lost in the churn of new experiences. With the flooding of new information up on that mountaintop, I quickly ascertained some strange qualities of the entire range. Specifically, I recall me and my father took a trip up to a peak only 5 or so miles away from... No, I'm stupid for not remembering. It was just one of those things that don't fit in the context of a child. Distance is indiscernible to a child. It was just an ethereal meadow and steep climb to the pioneer's cabin. Still going to defend my forgetfulness. The drive from the two places is close to a couple hours, but on the actual map, their location is eerily close in proximity. I called my dad to make sure I was remembering right. He was quiet for some time. My usually bubbly and talkative dad brought a solemn soundlessness. "Why are you asking me about it?" he had asked. I was thinking about the man at the cabin. Again, some quiet in between us. You remember him then?" "In parts." In truth, I didn't. It only hit me with his next line. "Memory." He sighed shakily. "Do you remember him speaking?" I hesitated. "Yes." "Don't go up there again, son." He gave his usual "I love yous" and then quickly ended the call. Strangeness of his tones set my nerves on edge. The memory replays even as I type this. The day was really great. I mean, really great. My dad was a nerdy techie who got bored of the city. That's why we had moved up to the northwest. He was tired of the arid desert areas of New Mexico. He wanted some mountains. Wanted something new. My dad's still a techie. He codes and makes the money. Never really been the biggest hunter. Thankfully, his new friends didn't mind taking me up with them. Hiking, camping, and fishing was more his beat in his free time. He taught me how to tie a fisherman's knot, how to set up a fire, and how to navigate. Always look behind when walking in an unfamiliar path. So on the way back, it will make as much sense as going up. I still live by his word. I must have been at least 9 years old. We had planned a little camping trip for 2 weeks. We'd never been up the pioneer path. It felt like I was the one lacking enthusiasm with how ecstatic my father was. We started out early, stopping by the gas station. He smiled. He adjusted his thin frame glasses and rubbed his short brown hair. "Well, Mr. Lewisman, would you care to get a pizza pocket before the drive?" Yes, sir, yes, sir." Kicked my little feet and jumped from the back seat. My Skechers lit up as I made contact with the concrete. My father walked up to the door and held it open as I excitedly launched myself into the place. Immediately I found myself at the deli. An older woman with hoop earrings stared down at me. "You gonna pay for it?" He smiled. "No." "Yes, he is," my dad said. I reached into my pockets, and my father turned his back and whistled out loud, his hand outstretched behind him with a $10 bill. I ripped it from his hand so fast, you'd think he owed me the money. "One pizza pocket, yes, and please," stated. The woman rolled her eyes, the smell of cigarettes wafting its way down to me. She went over to the counter and rung it up. $30, she said. My heart sank and sweat soaked into the $10 bill. I was had. It was a ruse. The money would not buy my way into pizza pocket heaven. I'm sorry, I'm joking, honey. Give me the 10. I shakily handed it off, and my dad slapped me on the back. My chest again swelled with childlike pride over my hard-earned money. $4.74 is your change. I grabbed it, saying my thanks as I quickly ran to the door. My dad almost beat me there. I looked out at the pumps and saw a bunch of beat-up old trucks, blue, gray, red, black. We were on our way to the trip of a lifetime. We shook along the old highway that led to that sunny valley. Yellow lines waved off by time and the assault of ominous rays. Trees pressed closer and closer, tightening our path to the entrance. Dad filled the air with chatter, talking about how at work he had debugged an entire issue with global scope in his software. How new techies don't know how to simplify. My memory goes out there, for obvious reasons. Strange how the little details will stick. The importance of the beginning leaves me. I don't remember the lot or even the sign, but I remember the trees of autumn. Orange, capturing what was the death of an entire forest. Clark would always comment that winter only loses to autumn because it's a pretty death instead of a quite one. Admittedly, it was some teenage angst now that I type it. The trees winded a fence-like path along the mountain. My dad and I crushed the large oak leaves as we went. Birch made its appearance further up. Beautiful white bark. Plenty of lovebirds carving their mark in the soft wood. I stumbled my awkward little body up the pathway, taking care to smell that forest scent, the silence that is the ambient breathing of the world. My pack was much too large for me, and a quarter way up, little old me gave it to my poor father. I was looking at my shoes. Yes, that's what it was. My little light-up shoes. The world began to seem like a distant memory. Sensation became nothing but incorporeal chatter outside of my reality. Something in the air had shifted, feeling that my own tension had been hijacked by an alternate source. Peered to the right set of brush, scattered birch trees that seemed to be moving ever so slightly to show me the new way up the mountain. It was the right way. I walked. Heavy hand grabbed my puffy coat. "Simon?" I'd bark. "Don't go running off the path, I'm serious." I nodded dizzily. "You know my rules on these things. Here I'll tell you more coding stories to take your mind off." If I couldn't sleepwalk before, I could after that statement. The feeling still crawled along the hairs standing up on my arms. For a moment, I was somewhere else. Thinking back, I honestly just thought it was a weird, childlike fascination with forest, adventurous attitude. But the bias inside the strangeness of recent events has tainted every last memory of that mountain range, somber and ominous. Trees soon slowly shuffled away, the mountain bidding itself welcome. Balding peak, reminiscent of... I couldn't quite make out the cabin right then, but it motivated me to climb. Dad could hardly keep up. Well, to be fair to him, he was packing my stuff as well. I trudged up the mountain with no regard for my beleaguered pack mule, my little shoes sparkling in my sprint. God, it's making me wince. Light up Skechers on a camping trip. Maybe I've got to remember to give 9-year-old me the benefit of the doubt. Never liked kids. The topic of hot debate with my girlfriend. We had finally arrived there. That cabin, an empty field lay behind it, rising into a great tidal wave of grass. Below, awash with the forest crashing against the proverbial shore. That cabin, the ship. I ran up to the little wooden steps and barged in. Lucky to find I hadn't stumbled on some hippies making memories. The sunset behind me bathed the room in orange light. Dark wood walls with names and dates scrawled all over them. 2 sets of shelving people used for bunking. I jumped, and a spot right in front of the doorway made a sound like it might give way. Was suddenly a little less enthused. Dad finally arrived, dumping the stuff next to the wall of words. We stared in mute appreciation of the mural. Giant ones that said Tay B, Josh Wolfus, and a beautiful sunflower. Okay, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Sunflower painter wasn't some art major, but it was nice. My eyes traced over the outer edges as if redrawing the thing in my mind's eye. Until it was here now. In the part of your brain that recalls the things you will see again when you die. Night set in, and my dad pulled a lamp from his overpacked bag. He pinched his shirt and cleaned his rectangular glasses off, put the lamp down, and we laughed about how long it took us to get there. You know, your mom and I have been thinking about moving back down to New Mexico. No. Put a hand up to silence me, a smirk playing on his face. I'm just joking. So you like it here, truly? Yeah, I love fishing and hunting and running and hiking and camping and up again. So what's going on at school, bud? That brought an air of silence to my chatty 9-year-old self. A ball of shame climbed its way to my throat and sat there. Until middle school, I hadn't made a single friend. Kids could sense the nature of my presence. It was a thing that enjoyed solitude and observation. They allowed me to do both. I wasn't great at the talking thing. I enjoyed being silent with people I liked, not something children are accustomed to. Not even sure adults can handle healthy silence. Nobody acknowledged my existence. I almost wished someone would pick on me, just so I could have had an excuse to talk to someone in my grade. I learned an adult emotion at a juvenile age: apathy. The kids are no fun here. That's why I like the woods, I said, my hand retrieving a pocket knife from my bag, a most prized possession. Curvy silver handle with a fat drop-point blade, a hunting knife. I waddled over to the wall as Dad continued his questioning. Why are they no fun? Because they won't sit next to me, I thought. Because they're all doing kid stuff. Kid stuff? Yeah, like they play with Legos. I go on cool hikes. I know plenty of the other kids go out with their dads fishing and stuff. What's really going on, Simon? I started carving my name into the wall. I'm their own. Just a bunch of LEWSMAN assholes. I finished. I turned and realized what I had said. My face turned red and burning heat came over me. Puff, my dad gave me a knowing look. Small smile touched his face. Don't say that again. Also, don't tell your mother I let you get away with that out here. Grinned. What happens at the cabin stays at the cabin. Stated. We began our dinner. A little propane stove he used to make us some grilled cheese. I sat patiently waiting for the gourmet delicacy to cook. That's when the knock came. I looked at my father in search of a reason to be afraid. A look like a deer when it hears a twig snap, or its way across my dad's face. My dad put his hand on his waistband where his knife was. He wasn't a big fan of guns. Unless they were used for hunting, he didn't bring them. He walked up to the door and cracked it. There were some murmurs at the door. My dad chuckled and let the door swing open. A man stood in the darkness of the outdoors. Some kind of vest on, strings hanging out of the pockets. A round hat that covered his face. It smelled like lake water the minute that door opened. Ah, so you're down by the river then? I was wondering if anyone was staying up here. Just my son and I. Sorry to say the cabin's taken. That right? My dad's back tensed a little bit. The man glanced over at me. He must have yelled because of how close it sounded. Remember the music, boy? I just cocked my head and stared. My dad's voice raised. What are you doing? Get out of the doorway. The man just stared past his shoulder without acknowledging him anymore. Stop staring at my fucking kid. My dad put his arm up in front of him. I was entranced in something I can no longer remember. Say something, you fucking creep, my dad said, pressing the man through the gap in the doorway. But Dad, he did say something, I said, cocking my head. My dad's head turned to look at me. The way I can describe his expression was pure, unadulterated fear, like he was suddenly looking at me through a distorted lens. You guys got a nice little Honda. Roads will be slick after the storm. Wait till sunlight, he said, more muffled. Dad said something quietly, but it was stern and had a hint of rage to it. The man waved a big, calloused hand and plodded back down the steps. The minute he stepped down those wooden things, it was as though his walk turned into air. Silence. My dad stared at the lamp. He began to pack when we heard the thunder. The sky was threatening to crack open. My father's face winced, color gone from it. He gripped his hair as if he were trying to keep his skull in place. Fuck. Dad? Be quiet, he said simply. I leaned back against the ground. I looked at the wall and saw a single word carved into the wall. One I didn't think was there before. Puha. This shakes me deeply now. Why did those words not occur to me before? The second was obviously the mountain we took the trip on. But Puha is still kind of strange to me. I am familiar with a thistle, sometimes referred to as that. I looked it up and possibly it has some like Hawaiian dictionary stuff. I'm honestly lost. Let me know if you guys know anything, please. The rest of that night was mostly my dad standing at any noise around the cabin. I slept just fine through the storm. When I woke up, I couldn't say the same about Dad. His techie face was etched in stone, and he looked more like an Idaho father than I'd ever seen him look. Let's go, was all he said. I looked towards my items that had been scattered, already packed into my bag haphazardly. He grabbed my hand, and before my legs were awake, we were trudging down the muddy field. It really had been a bad storm that night. He was determined to get us down quickly. I suddenly felt as though we were being hunted by something. My father pulled me close to him and looked in every direction with a discerning eye. Even me. Halfway down, Dad found signs of footprints. Fresh human footprints. But no one had passed us. His hand gripped that sheath at his side. I didn't dare speak a word to him. Hurry up, Simon. We're going home. Sounded more like he was trying to convince himself. We moved our way farther and farther down, sliding and falling until the car lot came into view. I saw my dad's eyes soften a little. I came over to the back seat. Before Dad had unlocked the vehicle, I pulled the back door open. He didn't notice as he flung himself into the driver's seat. My seat was wet, but the windows were rolled up. I knew he would kill me if he thought I left the window open, so I didn't say anything. Just put my coat down in my seat and sat down. He started up the car and tore out of there. He apologized on the way back, but his eyes held a hint of apprehension towards me, like he'd seen his son differently. He's kept that all these years. That's why I feel strange about it. Just that little pane of glass between a father and a son. I'm sorry about that little story I remembered, but it's been turning in my head since my little trip up Hindman. Theories have been forming. Possibility that a creep lived up in that mountain range seems more plausible now. Multiple, even with how many footprints were up there. The fact he had possibly stayed in our fucking vehicle makes me think that he only lives out in that cabin, sleeping in whatever he can find when it's occupied. Which made me consider, what if that's where Clark is buried, up by that cabin? That would mean I'm accepting it wasn't really him up on that mountain. But that is hard to accept. It's beyond hard to. Obviously, however, what it was meant me harm. But Clark wouldn't mean me any harm. It doesn't make any sense. One thing is clear now that I think about it. The sensation of that man in the doorway asking me that question feels exactly how the thing on the mountain speaking sounded. You know me. I know them? These are all just loose threads I'm trying to piece together here. I'm planning on going back to Pioneer's cabin very soon. I also wanted to thank Wolf Ducote. He brought up that the truck I had seen going up the day Clark disappeared could have been the same one I saw a couple months ago. I want to reiterate that it's a little too difficult to tell, but now I'll be on the lookout for a red beat-up Chevy. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. I'll let you all know what happens up at Pioneer's cabin. I've been busy trying to work in between these little excursions. I just got back from a guiding expedition with some wildlife photography. That's a story for another day. Anyways, I've been distancing myself from Stacy lately. That's my girlfriend, by the way. Not my real name, obviously. This has led to a rift between us that at first was uncomfortable. Something I tried to mend, but now I see it's given me more time to follow this rabbit hole. The nexus point of all my life, a gravitational pull I cannot escape, a whirlpool that will drag me down until I get to the bottom of it. I will know what happened to Clark, even if I have to cut every person off to do it. I've come to peace with that. One more thing to mention. My door was unlocked when I got home last night. Stacy and I are paranoid people. We don't leave doors unlocked. Never. If you thought that was unsettling, wait until you hear what lurks in the shadows of our next story. I didn't believe in ghosts before deployment to Japan. The yokai changed that. After the run-in with Kuchisaka Onna, I took things a lot more seriously. If I was out at night, I tried sticking to more populated areas and be home before midnight. Even then, I made a weekly visit to the nearby shrine and tried to do offerings to cover my ass when possible. It worked for a couple of months too, though I did make it a point to look into some of the more common yokai just on the off chance I ran into any. Turns out that even the most well-lit public places can be dangerous when it comes to spirits. No matter how safe you're trying to be, one of the most terrifying things about yokai is that they simply do not give a flying fuck about where they show up. It was around October maybe. I had gone out for a nice dinner with Hikaru, the girl I'd been seeing since my last encounter. It was nice. Walked through one of the parks at sunset, spending some nice time together. She was teaching me Japanese, so I was able to finally understand and conversate a little, but nothing beyond ordering at the restaurant usually. Either way, I was really falling for this girl, spending most of my time off base with her when I could. Maybe around 11, I walked her back home, little kiss goodnight, then it was off to the train station to get back to base. Sounds easy enough, and I was in a pretty good mood after a nice date night, relaxing and having a couple of drinks. The subway was a lot more empty than I expected, with the train platform totally empty by the time I got there. 10 minutes on the screen until mine got there, so I took a seat on one of the benches to wait. Pretty sure I started drifting off, the silence and flickering lights of the train station lulling me to sleep. Scraping sounds made me jump back up with a start, thinking my train had finally made it. Looking up at the screen though, there were still 5 minutes left on the arrival counter. The scraping was still going though, something dragging along the rocks lining the tracks below. I got up to see, wondering if maybe someone fell onto the tracks while I was asleep, and I didn't notice. It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried killing themselves with one of the trains out here. Hopefully that wasn't the case, and it was just a drunken accident or something. I approached the edge of the platform, cautiously standing back before leaning forward to see the source. The scraping sound grew louder, like it was trying to rush along the ground much faster than before, getting close. I didn't even see anything over the edge before a hand came up over the edge, grasping the concrete platform before another joined it. The fingers were bloody, scarlet shining bright against the pale white skin. A mess of dark black hair followed slowly behind, pulling itself up from the tracks toward me. Look, I may have been kind of stupid during my last run-ins, but I watched The Rig and The Grudge to know that pale girls with messy long hair are a fucking problem. Needless to say, I started stepping back fast, desperately trying to get away. The scraping sound got louder as she heaved herself onto the platform, long fingernails clawing at the clean cement, making terrible sounds. It looked at me, dark black eyes from pupil to edge, mouth wide in a silent scream. When she was fully on the platform, I could see the source of the dragging noise. Her body ended around her abdomen, jagged bones sticking out of still bloody insides. As she crawled forward on her elbows and hands, the protruding bones scraped the concrete below, making the awful scraping noise and leaving a bloody trail. God, as it grew louder, it sounded like nails on a chalkboard mixing with a train running off the rails. My head was pounding, getting dizzy just listening to it. I finally got my body to move, running toward the other end of the platform and the small guard station at the top of the stairs there. I had seen an older guy when I came through, though he didn't look like he was in the mood to help. Hopefully, he would make exceptions when it comes to yokai. Despite being somewhat in shape, I am the opposite of fast. So blowing out of the platform, I hit speeds previously unknown to man. I could still hear the scraping behind me as I flew by, desperately hoping to at least reach the stairs that might slow her down. Yeah. Nope. I did the classic mistake when up against weird shit, and I looked behind me after hearing the sound of scraping metal join the ruckus. This bitch was on my damn heels, a huge scythe held in one hand now, but walking along on her hands faster than a goddamn circus performer. I might have been propelled further by the adrenaline, especially because her face was more clear now, frozen in a disfigured scream of shock, anguish, and tormented pain that I'll never get out of my mind. As she got closer, she switched to hopping along on one arm, raising the scythe to cut me down to her size. Maybe it was the offering I had done a couple days before, but I think something was looking out for me as I finally reached the steps. Bracing myself for the inevitable trip and fall, I launched myself toward them, trying to clear the first few. It worked, miraculously, and her swing with the scythe went under my feet as I landed 3 steps up, grasping the rail. Even with my newfound luck, I had to keep running, legs and lungs both burning by now as I rushed further up the steps. It finally happened. I knew my luck wouldn't last for long, but barely 2 further up the stairs and I tripped, smashing my face on the edge of one of the concrete steps. It dazed me, hardcore, and I could barely get my vision back as I struggled back up, blood now gushing from my nose. All I could smell was blood. But the persistent sound of the yokai was gaining on me. I could hear the scraping turn to tapping behind me, getting louder as she pulled herself up the steps behind me. The jagged bones would drag up before flopping onto the next step, gushing blood from the exposed insides on her abdomen every time it was pushed in. The sound alone made me want to throw up, but the trail of bright red viscera behind her was something else to see. The train tracks behind her were glowing in the fluorescent lights above, looking more like the fires of hell every second. There was no getting back up, my head entirely fucked, and barely able to realize which way was up. All I could do was clamber back on hands and knees, pushing myself further up the stairs as she crawled behind. For a moment we made eye contact, making me stop in my tracks as something burned into my mind. It wasn't my memory, but I saw it like I was living it. A bunch of girls, just kids, pointing and laughing at me, telling me that my parents didn't even want me. So why should they? I was never going to contribute to society anyway, especially not since I was already one of the kids forgotten to the system. It's pointless anyway. All this school I've been going through, only to get scolded by the teacher for being stupid, while the other kids just laughed at me. They were right. I should contribute to the people around me in the way that would serve them all best. My vision flashed away. Now standing right in front of the same platform we were at, looking at the speeding train heading my way fast. One light was on the front, warm and welcoming, as I started walking closer to the edge. Conductor blew the train horn, though I'm not sure if he saw me. It would be too late if he did, because I stepped off right before the train came barreling into the station. I could feel the force of the train and wind as it knocked me back onto the train platform. As my vision faded, I looked back to where the train was stopped now, doors open and people pouring out on their daily commute. On the floor, looking up at all the people who would be better off without me, my vision faded as my last view was the jagged remains of my spine jutting from where my waist should be. The train came screeching into the station, bringing me back from the terrible vision being forced through to me. More than fear, I was in despair now. Tears stinging my eyes and broken nose as they trailed down. She was gone, no trail of blood or scraping sound in sight, other than the train grinding against tracks, slowing to a halt. I ran even faster than I had running away from her, diving right through the train doors and past a crowd waiting to exit as soon as they opened. Can't say I blame them for giving out a little scream and fleeing, because I probably looked like a murder victim running from hell right then. Cowering in the seat of the train car, I kept an eye on everything around me, waiting for her inevitable reappearance to take me just like she was taken. There was one other person sitting in the car, a younger guy dressed in casual clothes, wearing a baseball cap. He would side-eye me occasionally, though I wasn't paying him any mind. Despite everything, though, all I could feel for her was sadness. She scared the shit out of me. Sure, but from the research I had done on Onryo, she's a lost spirit. Even after running into the slit-mouthed woman before, the Teke Teke is still one of the most terrifying encounters I've had. When I finally left the station, I caught a glimpse of what I think helped me get out alive. The guy in the baseball cap left the station in front of me, walking in the same direction outside. I wasn't far behind him, still stuck in my own little world when he looked back at me, giving a small whistle and a wave, before suddenly disappearing. Like, there and gone, split second, with a tiny bit of smoke or vapor hanging in the air where he was. Through the smoke, I saw a little creature scurry off toward the nearby trees, leaping in and disappearing just like the guy. Back in the States, I would have thought it was a raccoon running off from the bushes. I couldn't place the damn thing, and didn't for another few months until I was out camping with Hikaru and a few of her friends. Out in the mountains, surrounded by trees, Hikaru and I were hiking a little ways from the camp to find some, alone time. Get what I mean? A little family of the same creature I saw came running out of the brush a little ahead of us on the trail. 3 tanuki, raccoon dogs, ran out and looked right at us before ducking back off into the brush. Hikaru made the loudest squeal I had ever heard. A huge smile on her face as they ran off, before telling me all about how people thought they were legends at one time. Apparently seeing them was pretty rare, and even though they're mischievous little shits, they're usually signs of good luck. So, despite all the terrifying things I've run into, at least I can say I've got a little bit of luck on my side. Unfortunately, that luck would only go so far, and we stopped going camping a few months later. Fear lingers, but a new terror awaits. Let's explore the next nightmare. I'm being haunted by a demon. Or at least I think. To start things off, my name is Sebastian. I've always loved horror movies, games, and heavy dark music. It all began way back in 2017. I had just gotten out of school. I was a senior at the time. As we got out of school, I decided to steal my friend's bike and rushed off down the street. That's when I got hit by a car. All I remember is the car hitting my body and me flying over it like something out of an action movie. And then darkness. I came to in the hospital, them stitching my eyelid back onto my face. And that's when I saw it. Outside of my room staring at me. It was an elderly woman just looking vacantly at me. I brushed it off at the time as another person in emergency waiting to be seen by the next available doctor. God, how I wish that was the case. After I left the hospital, I finished school and went on to meet a lovely girl, had 2 children, and it was after the death of my daughter that I saw her again. Outside the delivery room, that same vacant look on her face, except this time she was pointing at me. I went to approach her, but as I walked out of the room, I was stormed by doctors wanting to know the time of death, like they didn't already fucking know that. And poof, gone, before I could ask her what she wanted and why she had been there all those years ago. Fast forward to 2022, we were still mourning the loss of our daughter. I was drinking and smoking heavily to cope with the loss when on the balcony of our apartment, off in the distance in the woods behind our place, there she was again for the 3rd time, just pointing and staring with that same vacant stare. Only this time she was mouthing something as well. It was as if she was mouthing a warning. It was indeed a warning. God, how I wish I took it seriously and not some alcoholic-induced psychosis. It's now 2024, and after the death of my grandfather, we were forced to pack up and leave to Florida to stay with my grandmother while we save up to purchase our own home. And she's back, with malicious intent, thousands of miles away, not in a hospital setting. I swore seeing her out back in 2022 was a hallucination, but it wasn't. She's out back right now, pointing towards my room, mouthing, "You shouldn't have left." I closed the blinds, and I'm currently freaking out right now. How did she know who I was? What did she want from me? How had she followed me thousands of miles to Florida from Indiana? I don't know, and I don't care to find out. The sun is coming up now as I'm typing this, and she seems to be gone. I feel safer in the daytime. If she comes back again tonight, I'll be sure to attach pictures I took of her. Until then, Godspeed. As the last story fades, another sinister tale emerges from the void. The night shift. I'm not sure where to start with this, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. I work as a security guard in a mid-sized office building. Nothing fancy, just a regular office complex where I do the night shift. It's usually dead quiet. I do rounds, check the cameras, and spend most of the time staring at my phone. But last night, something happened. I can't shake the feeling that something's really wrong. The night started like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., took over from the day guard, and settled into my routine. The building's empty after 8 p.m., except for the cleaning crew that comes in for a couple of hours. They were just finishing up when I started. By 11:30, they were gone, and it was just me and the cameras. I usually do a walkthrough around midnight, just to stretch my legs and make sure everything's locked up. The building's got 6 floors, but only the first 2 floors are actively used by tenants. The rest are under renovation. I don't like going up to those upper floors. They're dark and full of half-finished walls, exposed wiring, and debris. I've always had a weird feeling about them. Part of the job is making sure no one's up there doing something they shouldn't. I left the security office and started my round. Everything was normal. First floor was quiet, the doors locked, the lights dim. I made my way to the second floor. It's a bit creepier at night because the motion lights only come on as you walk through, so you're always stepping into a pitch-black corridor until the lights flicker on. But it was empty, as always. I was about to head back downstairs when I thought I heard something. Just a faint, rhythmic tapping. I stopped, straining to listen, but it was gone. Figuring it was probably just some pipes settling or construction equipment, I shrugged it off and started down the stairs. There it was again. Tap, tap, tap. Faint, but persistent, coming from above me. I stood there looking up the dark stairwell toward the upper floors. No one was supposed to be up there. I debated whether to go check or just ignore it. It wasn't my first time hearing weird noises in this building. Renovations make things creak and shift. Still, the sound bugged me. Eventually, I grabbed my flashlight and made my way up the stairs, tapping growing louder with each step. Third floor was pitch black. My flashlight beam cut through the dust hanging in the air as I stepped off the landing. Floor was mostly unfinished, bare drywall, tools left scattered around by the construction crew. It was eerily silent except for the sound of my footsteps. Then I heard it. Faint creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards ahead. "Hello," I called out, no answer. I walked deeper into the floor, my flashlight bouncing off empty walls and exposed wiring. That's when I saw it. A door at the end of the hall. One that shouldn't be there. It wasn't part of the renovation plans. I knew the layout of the building by heart. This door was old, peeling paint and a tarnished brass handle. I stopped, staring at it, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. No way was that part of the renovations. It was out of place, like it had been there longer than the building itself. I'm not proud of this, but I didn't want to open it. Something about it felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I turned to leave, and that's when the tapping started again, this time from behind the door. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. My heart was racing, and my mouth went dry. There was no mistaking it now. It wasn't a construction noise, it was deliberate. I took a step forward, then stopped. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to open that door. I backed away slowly, my flashlight flickering as the tapping grew louder. Closer. I bolted. I turned and ran back down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. I could hear it now, that tapping echoing behind me faster, like something was coming down the stairs after me. I didn't stop running until I was back in the security office. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me, and checked the cameras. Nothing. Every floor was empty, just like always. But I knew what I heard. That door wasn't supposed to be there, and whatever was behind it, it wasn't supposed to follow me. I spent the rest of the shift glued to the camera feed, watching the stairwell, waiting for something to show up. Nothing ever did. When morning came, I left as soon as my relief arrived. I didn't say anything. What could I even say? I went back tonight, but I didn't do the walk. I can't bring myself to go near the upper floors anymore. Not after that. I don't know what to do. I need this job, but I don't know if I can handle it if whatever was behind that door decides to come back. The echoes of that story still haunt us, but we must now face a new horror lurking ahead. I think my little sister is being blackmailed. Why else would she date Toby Pickford? Series. When I had first heard they were dating, I thought it was a joke. Mom had been the one to tell me. We had been on the phone for nearly 40 minutes whilst I roamed up and down my small bedroom packing away my things into a suitcase. My 3 years at university studying animation and computer design were over. I was set to be picked up by Mum the following morning. "Oh," said Mum, "your sister has a new boyfriend." This wasn't particularly hot news. Lee had lots of boyfriends all throughout secondary school. "You remember Toby, don't you?" Mum said. "No," I said honestly. It had been years since I had last seen him, and I hadn't thought about what had happened on my 16th birthday. Perhaps it was harder to remember Toby because I hadn't told anyone about what I had caught him doing that day. "Toby Pickford?" I said. "Yeah," said Mum. "Toby who was at my birthday party years back?" I said. "Yes," said Mum. "Don't you remember inviting him?" I did remember. Toby was a year younger than me, and I had known him back when I was a member of the Maywell Scouts. Back then, I had seen a lot of Toby, but had never gotten to know him much on a personal level. He had been energetic, but also shy, very introverted. I could vividly remember all us little scouts dressed in our gray uniforms with the red scarves around our necks. One of the scout leaders would fill up plastic cups with diluted orange juice, and then we would each receive a biscuit. Toby liked to dip his biscuit into the juice. It was those memories of knowing Toby from Scouts which had prompted me to invite him to my 16th birthday party. A handful of my close friends were going, as well as some relatives. Although it was my 16th, I wasn't interested in making it into something big. I had been on my way home from school, walking down Hallworth Road when I spotted Toby waiting for the bus. He looked lonely, standing on his own, not talking with anyone. Whenever I saw him in school, he was always alone or at the fringe of groups. Anyone could tell he was very shy and the type that had difficulty making friends. I had stopped to get myself a bag of chips from the nearby chip shop. Without thinking too much about it, I had gone over to Toby and started a conversation with him. "Chip," I had said to him. He looked at me as if very confused for a second, and then he accepted the chip. "How have you been?" I said. "Remember when we were in Scouts together?" "Yeah," said Toby, tentatively smiling whilst he chewed the chip and then picked another from the bag. "You know," he said, "I saw your drawing in the art building, the drawing of the samurai. It's amazing." "Thanks, man," I said. I was used to compliments over my drawings. I loved drawing manga-style art specifically and found I had a talent for it. At 15 years of age, I could draw almost to the same technical level as the professional mangaka I admired. "I've started to draw manga myself," said Toby. Unprompted, though I didn't mind, Toby took off his rucksack, which looked big on him because he was quite small, even compared to me, and opened up a drawing pad. Toby's art was mediocre but showed promise. There were still plenty of circles with the usual crisscross lines drawn around them in an effort to create the head of the character he had drawn. The drawings. I had forgotten what Lee had mentioned to me once. She was in one of his classes once. She had sat behind him. Over the course of several weeks, Toby had seen to drawing pictures of Lee in a manga style. He showed them to her, and she politely acknowledged the drawings. Months later, Lee had made a Facebook post in which she made it clear she thought Toby was a pervert. The post itself was a picture of all different types of stick figure people. Each one showed a stick figure doing something like reading, or swimming, or singing, and so on. The idea was to tag your friends so they could be delighted by being tagged as the smart one, or the best friend. Lee had tagged Toby as the pervert. "Toby's a pervert? Really?" One of Lee's friends had posted. "Yeah," Lee had replied, but didn't elaborate. I had seen the post on Facebook and had asked Lee about why she thought Toby was a pervert, and she explained about the drawings. I had asked her if there was anything particularly perverted about the drawings themselves, and she said she just thought it was weird that he thought it was okay to draw her during class each week. If I had known this about Toby at the time, plus all the other odd but harmless-seeming things he had gotten up to in and outside of school, then I might have rethought inviting him to my birthday party. Toby looked at me with awe and bewilderment when I mentioned about my birthday party that was happening the next day, Saturday, and that he was welcome to come by if he wanted to. "Sure," he said eagerly. He then got on the bus and went home. The next day on my birthday, he turned up early and sat on the sofa whilst I opened my presents. Lee was there and had been shocked to see Toby was in our home. "What's he doing here?" she said to me when we were alone in the kitchen after I was done opening my presents. "Who? Toby?" I said. "Yeah," said Lee. "He's so weird." "Nah," I said. "He's just shy." Lee rolled her eyes. Lee was the complete opposite to Toby in a lot of ways. Naturally very pretty, outgoing, queen bee of her friendship group. I returned to the party and spent a few hours hanging out with my friends. We shared a 6-pack of beers out in the back garden whilst my parents and other relatives stayed in the living room. Lee stayed with Mum and Dad in the living room because, although she didn't dislike my friends, they were all a bunch of weebs like myself, and she just didn't have any common interests to talk to them about. It was around 5 p.m. when I noticed I hadn't seen Toby in a while. He was easy to overlook, so I glanced around the back garden and through what I could see in the house, but I couldn't spot him. Casually, I got up and decided to see how he was doing. I ventured through the house to the living room. He wasn't among my relatives either. Maybe he was using the bathroom? I waited around for 10 minutes chatting with my relatives, and then decided it had been long enough to go upstairs to check on Toby. I didn't know if he actually was upstairs. For all I knew, he might have gone home without telling anyone. I walked down the hall, and for a moment I wondered if he was doing something creepy in my sister's room. I walked casually to the first room on the first floor of the house. My sister's room. I peered inside and found the room was empty. Had I really expected to find Toby in there doing something weird? I had probably just let Lee's misguided opinion about Toby play in my mind too much. Josh had mentioned he wanted to borrow a CD of mine, an Iron Maiden album. So I decided to go grab it since I had come all the way upstairs and would likely forget if I didn't grab it there and then. I went into my room, whistling to myself, and that's when I caught Toby in the act. He was kneeling next to my underwear drawer and had one of my socks in his hand pressed against his nose. He was taking a big sniff of my socks. His other hand rested on the open drawer. Toby opened his eyes and looked at me in horror. Dropped the sock, stood up, and went almost as red as a tomato. "What are you doing?" I said. My words were tinged with bewilderment, as well as anger. "I'm sorry," Toby said. I could see he was utterly mortified by what I had caught him doing. "I wasn't," he began, as if attempting to explain why he had been taking a big old sniff of my sock. He seemed to give up before he could try for an explanation. He rushed out of the room like a frightened mouse. Strangely, he didn't leave my house for another hour. He stayed whilst everyone sang happy birthday. I tried to pretend like he wasn't there. After the cake was cut and everyone was handed their slice on a paper plate, I noticed Toby slipping out the front door. I had seen him more or less every day at school here and there after that incident. I had even spoken to him a few times. He had tried to show me more of his drawings, but I kept the conversations with him short and didn't stick around to give him hope of us hanging out again. I had been tempted to tell at least one person about what I had caught Toby doing in my room, but somehow I just never got round to it. In a way, I felt bad for Toby, who was already getting tagged in Facebook posts for being a pervert. Me spreading a truthful rumor about him, sniffing my socks, would be the final nail in the coffin to any kind of social life he had. What's more, I didn't much like the idea of being associated forever as the guy who had his socks sniffed. I hadn't been close friends with him before, so it wasn't a big deal pretending like he didn't exist after the incident. "Could you send me a picture?" I asked Mum whilst still on the phone. She had to go, but she sent me the requested pic a few minutes later. The picture showed Lee sat beside Toby on the sofa. They were holding hands, but had a hand's width of distance between them. Lee had her usual duck-face-style pose on for the photo, and Toby smiled sheepishly. The thing was, Toby hadn't undergone a major transformation. He was just older, taller, still had his baby face, and the same shy demeanor. The more I tried to picture Lee and Toby as an item, the more confused I felt. It was only the pure logic that I might not be able to understand what made their budding relationship work, or at the very least have potential, that prevented me from taking any kind of action, like calling up Lee and asking her what the heck she was thinking dating Toby of all people. Mum arrived at 11 a.m. to pick me up. As her little white car eased to a stop, I noticed Lee was sitting in the passenger seat. She was smiling and waving at me as I neared the car with my luggage. Mum got out of the car and helped me pack my stuff into the boot and the remainder, things like pillows and the duvet, onto the back seat. When we were done, I gave one last look to the house I had stayed with my flatmates for 2 years. First had been spent in a campus dorm room, and then we drove off. I sat in the back seat among all the stuff I was bringing home with me, whilst Lee, ever the thoughtful sister, remained sat where she was in the passenger seat. I noticed she was dressed in a top that was more revealing than usual. Didn't Mum care? Lee was dressing like this? I told myself that Lee was just making a particularly bad fashion choice, and to maybe bring it up with her later, in a way that wasn't going to feel too confrontational. I managed all of 5 minutes after we set off before asking Lee about Toby. "Are you both really together?" I said. Lee shot Mum a look. "You told him?" said Lee. "It just kind of happened," she said. "He's actually really kind of okay." "Okay," I said. "So how did you even start talking?" "I'm not talking about this right now," said Lee. "I mean, I'm sure he's a nice guy," I said, trying to be diplomatic, "but—" "Oh, I know he's a total weirdo," said Lee. "I know, but like, he's also kind of cute, okay? So this isn't some kind of prank?" I said. "You're really dating Toby Pickford?" "Yes," said Lee, getting annoyed. "What's, like, your problem?" "No problem," I said. I didn't say any more on the matter for the rest of the hour car journey back home. That sense of dread I had eased up and completely went away by the time we reached the door. I busied myself taking all of the things to my bedroom. Mum helped. She wouldn't leave me until she saw everything was unpacked. I ate dinner with Mum, Dad, and Lee, and everything seemed fine. I avoided mentioning Toby again, but it was Mum who brought him up. "When are you seeing Toby next?" said Mum. Probably tomorrow. Is it okay if he comes over?" said Lee. "Of course," said Mum. "Just remember to keep your door open. Keep the lights on. You know the rules when boys are in the house." "Okay," said Lee, and she took her dirty plate into the kitchen with her. When I entered the kitchen, I saw Lee was standing at the sink, staring out of the window. It was dark out, so the window was no more than a black veil. The soapy water in the sink had reached its limit and started to overflow, spilling onto the tiled floor. "Lee," I said to get her attention. She continued to stare at the window, remaining very still. "Lee," I said again, louder the second time. She snapped out of her reverie and gave a eep of surprise at the overflowing water. She turned the tap off and shoved her hand down the sink, pulling the plug and letting most of the water drain. She then sought to mop up the water that had spilled on the floor. "What's going on with you?" I said to Lee when the mess was cleared up. "Nothing," she said. "I was just thinking." "About what?" I said. "You've been acting really weird," she said. "I've been acting weird?" I said. "Don't you remember what you used to think about?" Lee raised her hand and said, "Hey, he's my boyfriend now. Can you stop trying to make a problem for us?" "I'm sorry," I said. I didn't know what more to say. I could tell if I pushed the issue any harder, it would upset Lee even more. It started to settle in that she might, somehow, for some strange reason unbeknownst to me, actually have feelings for sock-sniffing Toby. I said, "I'm sorry," a second time, and then gave Lee a big hug. I went upstairs soon after and went to bed. Following morning, I woke up to the sound of Lee giggling downstairs. I made my way down to the dining room. Then I saw him. Toby sat beside Lee at the dinner table. The immediate vibe I got from both of them sitting together was that they were genuinely enjoying each other's company. My brain had to adjust to seeing the older, slightly bigger and broader, still mostly baby-faced and altogether average Toby, was before me. "Hey," said, looking in my direction for a moment very casually, and then fixing his attention back to Lee. She was wearing the same tank top as yesterday and was sitting leaning against Toby. Toby had a look on his face, a kind of amazed wonder, as if he were even more surprised than me at the kind of treatment he was receiving from my sister. Toby drew himself back. "We shouldn't," he said. "We need to behave." "Oh, fine," said Lee, and she sat back in her seat. I didn't see much of either of them for the rest of the day. They stayed in Lee's room with the door open. I came and went from my bedroom to downstairs and back several times for different reasons, but most of all, to keep an eye on what they were up to. Toby seemed awkward and sat on her bed. Lee moved around a lot, doing most of the talking. By this point, I'd had enough of trying to guess what was going on. Whatever it was didn't seem like that big a deal, so I went to my room and spent the day relaxing, reading manga, and doing some drawing. After drawing for an hour listening to music, I decided to go make myself a cup of tea. It was as I made my way down the hall towards the stairs that I heard Lee and Toby having a heated discussion. "You're going to keep your mouth shut," said Lee, whispering what she was saying. "I'm not going to have you ruining this for me. Do you understand?" "Okay," said Toby meekly, "but what if they find out?" "They won't," said Lee. "Not if you act normal. The only problem here is you, so just be cool and I'll let you stay around. I don't have to be nice to you like this, you know that, right?" "Yeah," said Toby. "I'm sorry." "It's fine," said Lee. "Just do as I say from now on, okay?" Toby must have nodded that he was going to continue to do whatever it was Lee was asking him to do. It was strange hearing Lee speaking so intensely to Toby of all people. What exactly was she asking him to do? To not act strange, or was there something else going on that demanded Toby swear himself to secrecy? I retraced my steps back to my bedroom door and closed the door hard. Toby stayed until 10 p.m. Lee had taken a shower and had just stepped out of the bathroom into the hallway when I stood in her way. "Hey," I said, "can we talk?" Lee nodded, hugging the towel around her tighter. "I heard what you said to Toby earlier," I said. Lee's eyes went wide as if I had just stabbed her in the stomach. "You did?" she said. I realized then that she thought I already knew what she and Toby were up to, what they were trying to keep a secret. I hadn't planned to do so, but I continued to talk to her as if their secret was known to me. "Why, Lee?" I said. "Just tell me why." "I didn't intend for it to happen," he said. "Just did. I'm trying to make the best out of the situation." A renewed sense of dread was taking hold of me. What was it that she and Toby were hiding that had her so distressed? I was close to finding out what it was. "What does Toby have to do with this?" I said. Lee's concerned expression changed, becoming stoic. "Nothing," she said. "Leave him out of this." Lee started to move away, but I grabbed her shoulder. "Ow," she whimpered. "You're hurting me." "I'll let you go if you tell me what's going on right now." Lee's eyes widened, and I could see how frightened she was. She put a hand to my cheek and forced a smile. "Everything is going to be okay," she said. "Trust me." "How can I trust you if you don't tell me what you're hiding?" Lee's lips firmed up. "There's nothing you or I or anyone else can do about this. It's better you don't know. Now please let me go." I didn't let go. I couldn't. I felt like grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her until she told me everything. I felt like a monster even holding her arm as tight as I was, but it was all I could do. It was a weak threat I hoped she didn't see through. "Let me go, or I'll scream," she said. I didn't let go, and then Lee sucked in a big breath. I slapped my hand over her mouth, and her eyes went wide. I felt her tongue tickle my palm, and I let go of her mouth and her arm. Lee giggled and pranced back to her bedroom. Enough was enough. I had to talk to Mom and Dad about what was going on. If I couldn't get through to Lee, then maybe they could. I went downstairs and told Mom and Dad about all of my concerns, and I also told them about Toby sniffing my socks in my room on my birthday. Mom and Dad listened attentively and quickly shared the same level of concern as me. Dad shot up from the sofa. "What are you doing?" said Mom, standing up and hurrying to Dad's side, grabbing his wrist gently to stop him from thundering upstairs. "I'm going to find out what she's up to," said Dad. "None of this sounds right." I know, said Mum. That boy clearly isn't good for her. But don't go up there shouting and demanding things. Please let me talk to her first, okay? Dad looked to the stairs for a few moments before relaxing a little. Okay, he said. Talk to her tonight. If she starts messing you around, then I'll step in. I went to bed that night, unable to sleep. At around 4 in the morning, I noticed a light coming from downstairs. I got up and crept my way to the stairs and made my way down as silently as possible, doing my best to avoid the steps I knew creak. I spotted Mum and Lee sitting at the dinner table. They were whispering very quietly. Maybe Dad will get through to you, Mum said, sounding as if she were at the end of her patience. Don't, said Lee, whining. There's nothing going on, I swear. Stop lying to me, said Mum. You think I can't tell how different you've been acting? It's Toby, isn't it? He's blackmailing you, isn't he? No, said Lee, whining even more, on the verge of tears. He isn't. Then tell me, said Mum. Tell me everything right now, or else I'll let Dad handle things his way. Lee shot up suddenly and slapped Mum's phone off the table. Bitch, she said, and then Lee ran towards the stairs. She froze when she reached the first step, spotting me. She then renewed her effort to climb the stairs, passing me by. She hurried to her bedroom and shut the door behind her. Mum picked up her phone, placed it on the table, and then started to weep into her hand. I made my way down to her and gave Mum a hug. She was surprised to see me, but simply held me close. I tried, she said. She's not listening. Dad will have to sort her out. I stayed with Mum for another 10 minutes, and then we both went up to bed. I hated how things seemed to be getting worse, how Lee was passing by every opportunity to explain her situation so we could help. I thought World War III would start when Mum gave Dad the all-clear to go nuclear on Lee after last night. But nothing happened. Mum made breakfast, and Lee stayed in her room, and Dad went to work as usual. I wasn't eager to set off any dramas myself, more than I already had at least, so I decided to make plans to see my friends instead. I spent the whole day catching up with my friends who I had only seen here and there on visits back home from university. I didn't mention anything of what had been going on to them, but word of Lee dating Toby had gotten around. My friends were just as perplexed and a little repulsed at the idea of Toby and Lee being an item as I had been. I returned home just after dinner time and found Mum and Dad and Lee sat in the living room. Things felt far from normal because there was some tension in the air, but there wasn't any arguing or tears like I expected. After making some small talk with Mum and Dad, Lee just sat and watched TV with her closed fist resting against her temple. I took an opportunity to speak with Mum alone in the kitchen. Did you tell Dad to step in? I said. No, said Mum. I spoke with Lee some more about things, and there's nothing going on after all. She's just being a bratty teen. Wait, what? I said, confused. She's clearly up to something with Toby. I heard them. I pretty much got a confession about it from her. I just don't know exactly what it is she's up to. Mum looked impatient all of a sudden. She's in love, he said, and you're being a protective big brother. I'm so proud of you for caring so much about your sister, but there's nothing the matter. I couldn't keep the disbelief from my face. Last night, I had been so sure Mum was going to bring Dad into this, but now she was acting as if everything was okay. What had she found out from Lee to make her change her mind to this degree? Mum, is it blackmail? I said. Does Toby have something over Lee? That's enough, said Mum, crossly, pointing a finger at me. I'm telling you as your mother to drop this right now. No more. Do you hear me? None of this made sense. None of it. I didn't know what to say or do, so I simply nodded. Good boy, Mum. And she cupped her hand to my cheek and caressed it, and then she embraced me in a hug. Felt numb and angry, and I knew I had only one option left, to tell Dad about my concerns. But with Mum changing her tune on Lee and Toby, I no longer felt as sure of myself that something was wrong. What if it was all in my mind and there really was no problem? What if I was the problem? It was a horrible feeling to not be able to trust my own intuition anymore. Lee went out to see Toby, which gave Dad an opportunity to check in with Mum regarding everything that had been discussed yesterday. I stood in the dining room listening into Mum and Dad's conversation in the living room, Mom repeatedly said the same things she had said to me earlier to assuage any concerns my dad had. "Nothing's the matter," she said. "In fact, I think Mike is the one stirring trouble." Mom's words were like a slap to the face. "Really?" said Dad. "You really believe that story Mike told us about Toby sniffing his socks?" said Mom, derisively. "He's just jealous that another boy has taken up his little sister's attention." I clenched my fists and wondered for a moment if I was about to storm into the living room and yell at Mom. I decided against it, realizing there was nothing I could say against someone gaslighting me so much. My own mother, no less. "I should probably speak with Lee just in case," said Dad. "If you like," said Mom, "but it's all a worry over nothing." Things went quiet, and then I heard the sound of kissing. "What's gotten into you?" said Dad, unused to Mom's sudden assertiveness. Mom didn't say anything, and the sound of kissing resumed. I walked off to the kitchen and went out to the back garden for some fresh air and to get away from the sounds of what my parents were doing. I left a half hour later to hang out with my friends. I wanted to tell them everything that was happening at home. I couldn't bring myself to do it, for fear that I was the one making everything up in my head. I was sure something was wrong. Things just weren't adding up. But there was always the awful possibility I was wrong about it all. Over the next few days, previous drama involving Mom and Lee was as if it never happened at all. Lee stopped bringing Toby over and went out to see him instead. Mom and Dad continued on with things as usual. On the Sunday morning, I had been passing by Mom and Dad's bedroom and I could hear them talking in bed. Unexpectedly, I noticed the conversation was getting heated. "Nothing is wrong," said Mom. "Why won't you let things be?" "Stop lying to me," said Dad. "I can tell something is off. Mike can too. I've kept my concerns to myself, but you can't keep covering up for Lee." "What are you two up to?" "Nothing," said Mom. "Please, you're scaring me." There was the sound of kissing, but it stopped quickly. "Get off me," said Dad. "You've been like a rabbit in heat all week. I'm exhausted with it." "You love it," said Mom. "Come here." I heard the slap from Dad, which followed. "Don't touch me again," said Dad. "I mean it." I felt a strong urge to race to Mom's defense. Whatever was going on, she didn't deserve to be slapped by Dad like that. I stopped myself, however, because a part of me was relieved that Dad wasn't going to let Mom bury our concerns under the rug any longer. Not only was Lee acting strange, so was Mom. I listened for a while longer. The talk had stopped. Dad got up and took a shower. Mom wasn't making a sound. I was strangely excited to speak with Dad, whilst I waited for him to come downstairs after his shower. Together we would be able to get to the bottom of it. Mom came downstairs first. She had a redness on her cheek from where Dad had slapped her. "I fell," said Mom, spotting my concerned look. "Silly me." Dad came downstairs and, strangely, he was whistling. "Morning," he said, and he slapped Mom on the behind and then pulled up a seat at the dinner table. "Breakfast," he said. "Get to it." Mom fixed him with a dirty look. He met her look with a casual one of his own and smiled. Then Mom began to smile as if genuinely amused. "Fine," she said, coming right up. "What?" I thought. Nothing they were saying or doing made any sense. "Did you speak with Mom about Lee?" I said. "Oh yeah, but Dad, it's all fine. Just girls being girls." The knot that was in my stomach felt like it became several times tighter all of a sudden. I wanted to cry. Dad was fixing me with a look that was far too casual for what was going on. He had hit Mom, something he had never done, as far as I knew, and he had come downstairs, whistling, and then he had told her to make breakfast like an order. That simply wasn't the kind of man Dad was. "So that's it, Dad," I said. "You've changed your mind too?" Dad looked at me as if confused. "Everything's fine," he said. He reached forward and ruffled my hair as I were half my age. "You're overthinking things." Dad sat back and started to drum his fingers on the table. "How about you drop this behavior from now on, okay?" said Dad. "Fretting over nothing is only going to make things worse. You don't want things to get worse, do you?" "No," I said. Dad nodded. "Good," said. "Everything is taken care of. Just enjoy the free time you have right now. You'll have to start the job search soon, won't you?" I nodded. I was talking to my dad, but I wasn't at the same time. He was talking to me, and I had to listen. It was the same feeling I got from Lee and Mom. I was being spoken to, and nothing I said was going to make them admit to what was going on. I tried my absolute best to pretend like nothing was amiss. Toby started coming over every day, and Mom and Dad stopped having a problem with it. I kept an ear out for any more hushed conversations. I wasn't sure if they stopped, or if they were simply able to talk about whatever they were hiding without me catching on to it. 3 weeks passed, and the sense of everything feeling off didn't go away. Over and over again, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my imagination, only to catch a strange look from Mom, or Dad, or Lee. Mom and Lee had been talking about going shopping, and I had listened whilst I sat back and watched TV on the adjacent sofa. I had glanced over at them talking and had caught them both looking at me in such a way that I was sure their entire conversation had been a kind of act. This got so bad, I was painfully aware at all times that Mom, Dad, and Lee were always acting as if everything were fine and were always checking from the corners of their eyes to see if I was buying into it. I didn't know what to do. It was easy enough to go with the flow and have conversations with any of them. I tried to pretend like everything was okay. For all I knew, I was becoming mentally ill, or already was, and that they really were doing their best to appease me, as if I were really the one causing the feeling of disharmony in the household. My friends noticed how stressed I had become, but I decided not to continue seeing them for a while, as I was sure if I did, I would tell them about my concerns. I simply was too afraid to tell anyone else about what was going on, for fear that they would also act concerned initially, only to turn about and act as if all my concerns were just my imagination. I dodged concerned texts from my friends with messages explaining I was working hard on finding my first big job after uni, and couldn't spare the time to hang out with them. One thing kept occurring more and more. Mom, Dad, and Lee mentioned Toby in some way in pretty much every conversation they had around me. Toby would love to watch you draw sometime, Mom had said. Toby and Lee were thinking of going for a walk around the lake. Want to come? Dad had said. Toby was wondering if you would like to hang out and play a video game or something sometime. Lee had said. I had said no to all of these things and many others. It was obvious I didn't want to spend a single second around Toby, not with all this going on, and I couldn't understand why they wanted me to hang out with him so much. What was so special about him? The constant stress of dealing with my family's strange behavior wore me down. I started to take lots of stress naps to deal with the anxiety of it all. After yet more invites to hang out with Toby, not so subtly suggested to me throughout the day, I went to bed and crashed. I woke up sometime in the night feeling a sharp pain in my groin. At first, I thought it was a need to pee, but the pain got worse as if I were literally having something stabbed against my crotch to the point of bleeding. My eyes struggled to open, and my body felt incredibly heavy, even as I tried to sit up. I couldn't move much. Something was weighing down my arms and chest. My eyes adjusted to the near pitch dark of the room to make out the faces of Mom, Dad, and Lee looming over me. Mom and Dad were on either side of my bed and were pinning me down. Even Mom's strength was enough to pin my left arm down onto the bed. Dad had one hand pressing down on my chest and the other gripping my right forearm so tightly the skin felt like it was burning from the friction. Lee was the one pressing something against my groin. The pain made me want to thrash wildly about. Every alarm bell was going off in my mind that if she pressed even just a little bit harder, irreversible damage would be done to my crotch. Worse than them holding me down, worse than whatever sharp metallic object was being pushed deeper into my crotch, was the looks on the faces of my family. Their faces, though hard to make out in the dark, weren't the faces of maniacs or emotionless serial killers. No, their faces were twisted with anguish, almost as if they didn't want to be doing this to me, as if each of them wanted to scream into my face how sorry they were. "You're making us do this?" Mom whispered into my ear. Her voice was trembling. "The next time we invite you to spend time with Toby, you say yes," she said. "You will always say yes. Do you understand?" I understood, but I was trembling so hard it was as if I were dumped into ice-cold water. If I tremble any harder, it'll piece the skin, I thought, mad with fear. I could only imagine the look on my face, like some barn animal that knows it's about to be slaughtered but too dumb to comprehend why and how. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks and made the room harder to see. I blinked as hard as I could to clear up my vision. "Promise," Mom yelled into my face. Hearing my mother shout into my face the way she did, with such barely controlled venom, was the worst sound I had ever heard in my life. "I promise," I said, saying the words as if each syllable were foreign to me. I could hardly speak from the fear gripping me. "Please, please, don't hurt me," I said as loud as I dared. "This is your only warning," said Dad. "You're making us do this. Everything will be fine, so long as you are nice to Toby and all of us. Now we're going to let you go, and you're going to lay still and not move an inch until the sun comes up. Is that understood?" "Yes," I choked out. For a horrible second, I felt warmth at my crotch. She's pierced it, I thought. A moment later, however, I realized I had wet myself in fear. Hot pee soaking into the mattress. Lee pulled her hand away, and whatever it was she was holding. The horrible stabbing pain stopped. The residual ache of having something sharp having been pressed there remained. Like shadows, each member of my family melted into the darkness. They left the bedroom door open. I sobbed in the dark and didn't move, except for the trembling which I couldn't stop. Bit by bit the sun rose and a hard orange glow filled my bedroom, which stank of urine. It had laid trembling in bed for around 3 hours before the sun came up. I eventually found the will to get out of bed. I grabbed a change of clothes and took a shower, and then put the urine-drenched clothes into the hamper. I felt emotionally and physically exhausted and burnt out from the fear of what had happened. I could hear them talking downstairs, as if all was fine with the world, the smell of bacon and eggs rising up to the first floor of the house. I was starving. I made my way downstairs and saw Mum, Dad, and Lee sat eating breakfast. "Morning," said Mum. "I heard you get up, so I made you a cup of tea." She slid the freshly brewed cup of tea over to me, and I sat down at the dinner table. The others ate and made small talk, whilst I stared at the cup of tea as if it were some alien object. My hand continued to tremble as I gripped the handle and brought the cup to my lips and drank. My parched throat enjoyed the taste of the tea immensely. "So, Dad," said Lee casually, "I was wondering if Toby could come over today?" It was almost comical how much tea I spilt on my lap when Lee spoke up. My lap burned from the scalding tea. "Oh dear," said Mum, and she fretted about dabbing a cloth on my lap to handle the worst of the mess. I barely even registered the pain of the tea because I was fixated on what Dad was going to say to Lee. "Should be fine," said Dad, and he pretended a novel idea just occurred to him. "You know," he said, pinching a slice of toast from his plate and biting into it, "I think Mike and Toby should hang out today too. What do you think?" "Sure," said Lee. "I think Toby would like that." None of them made any particular look towards me, but I could tell they were waiting on my response. Of course they were. I hadn't dreamed they were threatening me 3 hours ago, had I? Had I? They acted so casually, nibbling at their breakfast despite everything that had happened. A part of me still doubted myself. "Sure," I choked out. "Good man," said Dad, slapping me on the back. "Great," said Lee cheerfully. She started typing on her phone. "I'll let Toby know." I heard a clunk near me on the table. Mum had just put down a fork I hadn't seen her holding before. She smelled of orange juice and biscuits. I think my little sister is being blackmailed. Why else would she date Toby Pickford? Part 2. I could still feel the pain in my groin from where something sharp had been held, almost to the point of piercing the skin. There had been blood, which I had cleaned up with a flannel and several sheets of toilet roll tissue. The pain in my groin served as a constant reminder that morning that I wasn't safe, and wouldn't be until I could figure out what Toby had done to my family. I hadn't touched any of the breakfast Mum had made beyond nibbling the crust off a slice of toast. Dad had excused himself and had gone upstairs. He said he was going to leave shortly to run errands. Lee was sitting at the dinner table, looking down at her phone, seemingly not paying me any attention. Mum had picked up the fork she had set down beside me before and had taken it back to the kitchen. I already had a fork set for me, and I had realized after the fact that she likely would have held the fork to my throat. And worse, that I not agreed to hang out with Toby when Dad had brought up the idea. I wanted nothing more than to go back to bed. The memory of my family surrounding my bed, pinning me down, and threatening my life was a worse lingering pain than the one in my groin. Whilst I sat at the dinner table, Lee's phone pinged numerous times. I had been so lost in my own reverie, I hadn't heard the first half-dozen pings, but there were enough to bring me out of my thoughts. "What is it?" I said. Lee groaned. "Nothing," she said. "Drop it." Before I could say anything more, the doorbell rang. Lee lifted her gaze from her phone to me. "It's probably Toby," she said. For a moment, I wondered if I was really going to get up and go answer the door. The idea of seeing Toby after last night made me want to vomit. There was still a part of me that was willing to put up a fight with Lee, Mum, and Dad, even after how they had threatened me. But it was a mad, insignificant, defiant part of me. It was all idea, no action. I was afraid, confused, and sleep-deprived. There was simply too much bearing down on me to even consider going against my family's demands. Toby's arrival was uneventful and passed by like a half-remembered dream. I was so delirious with everything I had numbly greeted Toby at the door, spoke with him briefly about the weather. It was an unusually hot day, and then we ventured upstairs to my bedroom. I felt as if I were a video game character being viewed from the third person, able to move my body but not really experiencing everything firsthand. There were brief instances where I had to make certain choices that couldn't be done on the delirious, dissociative autopilot mode I was stuck in and didn't want to leave. About 10 minutes after I met Toby at the front door and welcomed him inside, I found myself sitting in my computer chair watching War of Chaos's menu emerge on the screen. "Do you want to play?" I said, gesturing to the keyboard and mouse. "No thanks," said Toby, sitting slightly behind me on my right on a chair taken from Lee's room. He then added, "I prefer to watch." "I bet you do," I thought. I played the game for an hour, continuing the campaign I had started, but hadn't played for over a year. I sighed and stretched, having found momentary bliss in forgetting the world and concentrating as best I could on the needs of my cosmic marine. Toby hadn't said a word the entire game. I looked over my left shoulder to the doorway, flinched. Lee was standing at the doorway watching me with unblinking eyes. For a half-second, she remained motionless before she sprang to life, as if remembering to play the part of my sister. "Having fun?" she said, smiling, entering into my room and standing behind Toby's chair. "Yes," Toby mumbled. "Mike's playing as the Cosmic Marines. He's really good at the game." "Oh, cool," said Lee. "Can I watch too, Mike?" I realized I was clenching my fists hard enough to make my hands tremble. I opened my hands and groped for the right words to say. "Sure," I said, wishing the opposite, but not daring to refuse what Lee asked. Lee's phone pinged again. She stuffed it into her jean pocket and left the room. I thought she might leave us be only for her to return with a chair that she placed beside Toby. She sat on it and looked beyond me to the computer screen, seemingly just as ready as Toby to watch me play the game. It was getting hotter in my bedroom, and the slight smell of urine was present in the room coming from my bed. Toby began to take off his hoodie, but Lee put her hand on his wrist. "What are you doing?" she said. Toby looked at her sheepishly. "Taking off my hoodie," he mumbled. Lee just shook her head slightly in a no gesture. "But it's hot," said Toby. Lee shot a look my way, and I felt fear stab in my chest. I did my best to casually look away from her and to fix my attention back to the game, starting the next mission, pretending not to take much notice of Lee and Toby's disagreement. I heard the rustle of Toby's hoodie fabric and the creak of the plastic chair he was sitting in, and then a sudden hard slap. "I said no," said Lee. "Now stop it." There was silence between them after that. 20 minutes passed of me playing the game and Toby and Lee watching. The next mission had only just gotten underway. I was fortifying my base well enough, but imagined the insectides were going to spring an attack soon enough. They were a parasitic race, which was best to avoid all possible confrontation with, since to confront them meant risk of the parasite spreading through your troops. Destroying them all at once was really the only viable option to make it to the end game. They were more likely to attack first since they had a constant need to feed. Clinking of glasses and the rattle of plates brought me out of the game. Mum was at the bedroom door with a tray loaded with food and drinks for us, orange juice, biscuits, and tuna sandwiches. Toby and Lee accepted the drinks, both giving polite thank yous. I hesitated to take mine, but did so, setting my share next to my keyboard. "Watch a playing?" Mum asked. "War of Chaos," said Lee. "Mike's really good at it." "Really?" said Mum. "It looks fun. Mind if I watch?" There was a long moment of silence. Because nobody objected, Mum went away and returned with a chair from her bedroom and sat down beside Lee. I continued playing the game and noticed sweat dripping down my temple. The day had gotten much hotter, with bright beams of daylight streaming into the room. I wiped my brow, and as I did so, I looked behind me. Toby was red-faced, sweating profusely in his hoodie. Lee was wearing a simple top, so was handling the heat fine, and Mum had taken her cardigan off, so she wasn't too bothered by the heat either. They all drank their glasses of orange juice and, almost identically, dipped a biscuit into their glass, soaked it into the orange juice, and ate it. Soon after, there was a sudden rustling of clothing. Toby had taken his hoodie off. Lee and Mum's eyes stared at him unblinkingly after he did that. Then, after a moment, Mum forced a smile and mumbled something about getting the clothes out of the wash and left the room. Lee looked away from Toby as she thought about what he had just done. It became immediately clear to me as soon as Toby had taken off his hoodie why Lee might have been so against it. Toby had at least a dozen crisscross scars across both forearms. I pretended not to notice and went back to my game. Shortly after, Toby broke the silence. "I think I'm going to go home now," I said. "No, you're staying," said Lee. Toby stood up suddenly. "I can't do this," said. "This isn't what I wanted." "I know it isn't," said Lee, "but now you have to live with what you've done. You don't have a choice." I wondered if throughout all this I was supposed to even be aware this conversation was happening. What scared me most was how they were now having this kind of conversation with me in the room, as if what I thought about any of it no longer mattered. "I'm going," said Toby, and he started off towards the bedroom doorway. "No," said Lee. And then I felt sharp edges against the topmost part of my left ear. "No, don't, please, no, stop, Toby." I dare not look behind me, but I could just make out in the thin black plastic of my PC monitor the sight of Lee holding a steak knife to my left ear. "If you don't sit down right now, I swear I'll do it," said Lee. Toby started to whimper. I remained as still as I could manage, silently wishing for Toby to listen to Lee. "Please," said Toby, beginning to sob. "Please, I just want to go home." I felt the teeth of the knife dig into my ear, drawing blood. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I trembled, doing everything in my power not to move, should Lee decide to carve into my ear with as much force as she could muster. Toby hurried over to the chair and sat down. "I don't want to do this," said Lee. "But you're making me do this. Behave. Are you going to behave?" "Yes," said Toby pitifully. "Good," said Lee. "Please," I said, choking the word out. "Why are you doing this?" Lee sighed but made no effort to remove the knife from my ear. "This is all Toby's fault," said Lee, "because of something he did to your sister. Now I'm stuck in this body, in this life that isn't mine." "Who are you?" I said. "Oh, come on," said Lee. "You've already figured it out. You tell me." "Toby," I said. "You're Toby." "That's right," said Lee. "And I'm stuck in your sister's body because Toby found a way to copy his mind over into someone else. He thought by taking over my body he could get what he always wanted." "You?" I said. Lee stifled a mirthless laugh. "No," he said. "You." Lee sat herself forward more, leaning against me because I could only imagine the arm holding the knife was starting to get tired. "Toby has been obsessed with you for years, even before you invited him to your birthday. He worships the ground you walk on." "It's not like that," said Toby. "I just wanted a friend." Lee kissed her teeth and ushered for me to turn around. She moved the knife from my ear to my neck. I watched her do it, thinking at any moment I might try and tear the knife from her grip, but the consequences of failing to take the knife from her was too much for me to risk. Not only hurting myself, her too. What if my sister was inside there somewhere? What if she could still be saved? "First, he took over your sister," said Lee, "and then when you wouldn't leave things be, I took it upon myself to take over your mom and dad too. and I'll take over more until you both learn to do as you're told. What do you want from me? Dad? Lee pushed the knife into my throat enough to make me tense up all over my body. I could see the madness in her eyes. All you need to do is behave, she said. Let me figure out the rest. If you tell anyone about this, if you try to reveal what's going on to anyone, we'll just take them over too. Lee turned to Toby. And you? She said. If you don't start listening to every word I say, I promise you Mike will be the one who suffers the consequence. Do you understand? Toby stared at Lee with wide eyes. Toby, said Lee. I said, do you understand? Lee dug the knife harder against my throat. I convulsed from the pain, making the cut even deeper. Warm blood leaked down my neck. I understand, said Toby, nodding profusely. Please, 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 I understand, he said. Good, said Lee. She pulled the knife back from my neck. You boys keep enjoying yourselves. I'm going to have a little word with Mum. And with that, Lee walked out of the room, leaving Toby and I alone. I grabbed a nearby sock from the floor and pressed it to the cut on my neck. I'm sorry, said Toby, his face a wet, shiny mess, his eyes puffy as if he were stung by a bee near each eye. How did you do it? I said. I didn't care to give him any sympathy. I just needed to know. Toby sniffled and wiped the tears from his eyes as he gathered his thoughts. He glanced to the empty doorway and then said in a whisper, spoke incredibly slowly, choking out each word. Have you ever heard of astral projection? It's like your spirit leaving your body, I said. Consciousness leaving the body, said Toby. I did it by accident. I tried to take my own life. I just wanted to end it. But I didn't take enough pills. I just fell into a deep sleep, and the next thing I knew I was standing outside of my body. Renat, I thought maybe I had died, but I could see my body was still breathing in bed. I moved around my room, floating. It was cool. Toby looked away from me, his puffy eyes searching the carpet, stained with droplets of my blood. It was late at night, and my consciousness, I don't know if you could call it a spirit or ghost, I don't know. I left my house, floated right through the wall, and then He started to sob into his hands some more. Just spit it out, I said. I knew the way to your house, said Toby. I went through the front door and I was just looking around. I didn't intend to do anything to anyone. I didn't even know that I could. The whole thing didn't even feel real at the time. I went up to your room and you weren't there. I was going to go home because I didn't think it would be a good idea to be away from my body for so long. And then, you know the rest. Tell me, I said. I want to hear you say it. I went into your sister's room, said Toby. I saw her sleeping, and then I got closer and closer, and then the next thing I know, I'm awake in my bed. Not, but I was okay. Besides, being too stupid to know how to kill myself properly, everything was normal. It was as if it was all a dream or something. I even made myself think that none of it had been real. But then, 2 days later, I got a call from your sister. She told me she wanted to meet up. I probably would have thought it was some prank, but it seemed like too much of a coincidence for her to call me out of the blue right after I astral projected, so I met up with her. And what? I said. You decided to start dating? No, said Toby. I mean, that's what we told people. We thought it was kind of fun at first. Toby leaned closer to me. She's crazy. They're unstable. I drove a punch so hard into Toby's face it was a wonder I didn't break my wrist. Toby hit the ground, blood gushing from his nose. Threw myself on top of Toby and started to strangle him. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I didn't care. I just needed all of it to stop. Maybe killing Toby was the way to make it stop. Toby thrashed in my grip, but I held his throat as tight as I could. Mum and Lee raced up the stairs, having heard the commotion, and charged into me to get me off of Toby. Toby breathed in a lungful of air as Lee and Mum wrestled me to the ground. For several seconds I fought against them before I felt the now familiar sensation of a knife at my throat. Stop, Mum screamed into my face. Stop it. I stopped thrashing, going still. Get him out of here, said Mum. Lee took hold of Toby and got him to his feet. She said something into his ear that I couldn't make out. They left the room. What did he tell you? Said Mum. Everything, I said, trying to catch my breath. I know you're not my mum. Good, said Mum. I was getting sick of pretending anyway. If I take this knife from your throat, are you going to stay calm? I considered the question, then nodded. Mom drew the knife away from my neck. There was blood on her hand and more blood on my shirt. "Stay here," said Mom. "I'll get you something for that cut." "Wait," I said. Mom, standing, waited for me to speak. "Why not just take me over too?" "'Cause," said Mom, "then we wouldn't have anything to stop Toby from trying to kill himself. He doesn't care about his own life, but he does care about you. We don't know what will happen to us if he dies. Maybe you'll get your family back, or maybe we'll still be stuck in these bodies. Who knows? All I know is I don't want to die, even if I am just a copy." I didn't know what to say. Mom, or Toby, in Mom's body, wiped a tear from her eye. "I'm sorry," she said, and walked out of my bedroom. In the wake of Toby, Lee, and Mom having left my room, I at last felt a reprieve, at the very least from the confusion of what was happening to my family. Mom and Lee talked with Toby downstairs for 10 minutes before Lee left with Toby, to where I don't know. It's been 8 hours since they left the house. I've hidden myself away in my room, trying to think about what my next move should be. I have to do something. But what? I think my little sister is being blackmailed. Why else would she date Toby Pickford? Part 3. I had given an immense amount of thought to how I might kill Toby, but talked myself out of it every time. Truth was, I wasn't a killer. It wasn't that I couldn't just grab a knife and hack into Toby's neck. I was certain I was capable of doing that. The same way I was sure I could, hypothetically, bring myself to humanely slaughter an animal, like ripping the head off a chicken. The difference between a chicken or other farm animal was that Toby had a soul, or something very much like it. The fact he had been able to carry over whatever essence it was to him to my family members was proof that there was something ethereal at work behind the blood, muscle, bone, and nerve endings that makes up human beings. A chicken I could kill because animals don't have souls, at least not the type that possibly, maybe, be of the kind that carry on into some kind of afterlife. I'm not religious, though my parents were vaguely, culturally Christian. The more I considered killing Toby and how I might go about it, the more I had to wrestle with the profound questions that came with taking a life. Closest I was able to come to convince myself it would be okay to kill Toby, thus potentially severing whatever astral connection he had accidentally. Used to take control of my family was killing him in self-defense. That I could do. That was the problem. Toby wasn't out to kill me. Weeks ago, it had been revealed to me in my bedroom with Toby Lee and Toby Mum present that Toby was a suicide risk. It was because he had tried and failed to take his own life that this whole mess even got started. He had astral projected into my sister without realizing what would happen. Again, so he said. For the most part, I did believe him. It was possible Toby would kill himself, take his piece off the board, without me having to take matters into my own hands. Part of me held out hope he might take his own life. At the same time, knowing I was hoping for someone to commit suicide sat with me as a constant, sickening dread. Never in my life have I wished ill to anyone, and I hated that Toby, by his actions, made me wish harm on another person. I just wanted my family back. My not family stopped pretending to be normal around me at home. Toby Lee and Toby Mum had taken to wearing male clothing, for the most part, instead of anything Lee and Mum would usually wear. Most days I would find Toby Lee sat in her room wearing the same old sweatpants and a large black hoodie. She had started to put on some weight because she ate a lot of junk food while she occupied her time playing video games and watching movies. Toby Mum was the same, almost identically so. She spent the majority of her time also in sweatpants, though she had come to favor wearing Mum's usual pink fluffy bathrobe as her comfort wear of choice. She, like Toby Lee, had started to put on weight because she too enjoyed eating an unhealthy amount of junk food. Toby Dad did the same thing upstairs in Mum and Dad's bedroom. Just sat in bed, ate junk food. Dad kept the weight off easier because of his job in construction, either watching TV or browsing the internet on his laptop. The three of them hardly talked to each other, except when it came keeping up appearances outside of the house. To their credit, they were able to pretend to be my family outside of the house to a perfect degree. Toby Lee continued to hang out with all her friends, going to parties and on shopping trips. As far as I could tell, she took little joy in doing these things, but was able to pretend she was enjoying herself in front of her friends. But the second Toby Lee got home, she raced upstairs and changed into the same tired hoodie and sweatpants, kept to herself in her room. Toby Mum made outings to catch up with Mum's usual social circle of friends, keeping up with all the gossip, birthday parties, and so on. Toby Mum and Toby Dad even went to a wedding together and pretended to be perfectly normal the entire time. I had gone with them to keep an eye on them, fearing they might become a danger to themselves or anyone at the party who might have seen through the masquerade, but nobody did. There had been one moment when my uncle had poked fun at Toby Dad about something trivial. I didn't catch the start of the conversation, though. I think it had something to do with Mum gaining weight. For a brief moment, I saw the killer intent in Toby Dad's eyes. He had taken hold of the cutlery nearest him, the reception dinner. It wasn't that Toby Dad was angry about his wife's weight being brought up as a topic of conversation, but I think Toby Dad was afraid that my uncle might have put two and two together. As soon as Toby Dad was sure that my uncle was just making a bad joke and not actually investigating any strange change in behavior, Toby Dad put down the knife and simply played along with my uncle's poorly thought-out joke. I had been on edge for weeks, waiting to be woken up in the middle of the night and threatened again, or for anything drastic to happen. But nothing did. I did, however, stick to the golden rule of spending the majority of my time hanging out with Toby. Mostly this involved me playing video games, whilst Toby watched. He became something like a shadow, there but hardly ever talking, just watching. It was like he had possessed this adjacent role in my life, vicariously being around me the majority of the time, but never so much that he got in the way. Never in my life had I met a more nothing of a person. There simply wasn't that much to Toby. He didn't have strong beliefs on things. No hard opinions on books or movies, no funny observations. He ate whatever was easiest to eat. Had given up drawing because he wasn't interested in keeping up the daily grind of getting better. I had spent the best part of 2 months in his company and hardly felt I knew him any better. At best, he brought about a strong sympathy in me for how pathetic and lonely he seemed. I could understand that because, and especially because of everything going on, I felt lonely myself, missed my family and my friend. I stopped hanging out with my friends for fear of dragging them into this mess. I'd had to deal with a slew of upset calls and text messages for a few weeks, but eventually, my friends, each in their own time, gave up trying to hang out with me and seemed to accept that I no longer wanted to spend time with them. Of course I wanted to spend time with them, but I loved them too much to drag into the hell that was my life. Toby Dad spent the majority of his time at work. I think the Toby inside of him must have enjoyed the construction job Dad did. Out of the three, Toby Dad seemed the most at ease stuck in the body he was in. Still, being a guy must have also played a big part of that too. Mum's role of buying groceries and making dinner fell to me. Nothing was said between me and Toby Mum beyond me asking for money to pay for the groceries. Felt wrong to ask for the money, but I sucked up my pride and asked because I needed to make sure my family had access to regular meals, keep them somewhat healthy. There had been 2 weeks of nightly takeaway orders delivered to the house, expensive orders. I took it upon myself to do the shopping and to cook the meals to make sure the Tobys didn't bankrupt my family's savings out of sheer laziness. I had considered learning how to astral project, but an experience I had 3 months after returning home from university made me decide never to attempt it. I had finished cooking dinner for everyone, washed up, and spent an extra hour cleaning around the house. They all were happy to live like slobs, but I wasn't. After putting away the laundry, I tiredly climbed the stairs and went to my room. I lay in bed for a while, staring off into the darkness, too in my own head to drift off to sleep easily, but also too tired to feel up to anything but laying in the dark. I didn't remember falling asleep. I woke sometime during the night and knew right away I wasn't alone in my room. The thing was, I couldn't move at all from the neck down. My face also felt stiff, with just my mouth and eyes moving freely. I was paralyzed. "Mike," whispered a voice. I knew the voice right away. It was Lee's, or rather, it must have been Toby in Lee's body. Toby? I whispered back. My entire body was rigid and felt hot under the bed cover. For a moment, I feared a repeat of what had happened last time was about to occur. But from what I could just make out in the near-pitch darkness of my bedroom, there wasn't anyone around. Toby Lee must have been in my room somewhere, at the far end in the darkness. But I couldn't make her out, and I couldn't raise my head or sit up to attempt a better look. "It's me," said Lee's voice. "I've missed you so much." I didn't understand. Toby Lee saw me every day. I had served her dinner earlier at the dining table. The only time my possessed family gathered together in the house anymore was when I presented them with food. "I can't move," I whispered, choking the words out with great effort. "It's sleep paralysis," said Lee's voice. "You're not fully awake. That's how I'm able to talk to you. I've missed you so much." Tears began to streak down my cheeks. "Lee," I whispered, "is it you?" "Me," she said. "I've been so afraid. Please help us." Her voice sounded as if it weren't just coming from somewhere on the far side of the room, but far away, as if from the depths of a cave. "Mom?" I choked. "Dad?" Lee understood what I was trying to say. "They're not here," said Lee's voice. "I've seen them, but they can't leave. We're trapped. Help us. Please, Mike, help us." "How?" I said pitifully. "You need to leave your body," said Lee's voice. "You need to push Toby out of our body. It's the only way." Her voice seemed to echo around the room, but I was sure the echo was purely in my mind. Was Lee's spirit somehow communicating with me? From where and how? "Where are you?" I choked out. The voice didn't respond to the question right away. A silence that felt oppressive and uncaring snuffed out any other sound in the room. I silently prayed none of the Tobys in the house would hear what was being said between me and the voice. When the voice didn't respond to my question, I tried for another. "Are you here?" I choked out. "Yes," said Lee's voice. "In the room?" I whispered, my mouth feeling numb as if I were learning to say words for the first time. "Yes," said Lee's voice. "And I see you?" I said. More silence. I noticed, even with how dark it was, that the air leaving my mouth was visible, catching the tiniest sliver of light peeking through the bedroom curtains. The temperature in the room had dropped significantly. Worse, I felt very unsafe. "You need to leave your body," said Lee's voice. "You have to do it now." The darkness on the far side of the room somehow became even thicker, in a way that made me wonder if my eyes were struggling to focus and playing tricks on me. I almost expected to see some ghostly apparition of Lee, but instead, there was only darkness. The feeling of being unsafe continued to build. The room became so cold I was shivering in bed. "What's happening?" I said, finding myself waking up a little more and able to talk that bit more freely. "We're running out of time," said Lee, her voice taking on a strange new tone. It was as if she were speaking from the back of her throat, with the resonance of an old woman. "How do I leave my body?" I said. "Will it?" said Lee's voice. "Command your soul to leave." "My soul?" I said. "Yes," said Lee's voice, but it didn't sound like hers anymore. It sounded like a little child under some kind of deep hypnosis. I realized then that I wasn't talking to Lee, or Toby in Lee's body, or any kind of astral projection, and it wasn't a nightmare either. "You're not Lee," I said, my teeth chattering from the Arctic level of cold in the room. I immediately wished I hadn't said what I had just said because the feeling of oppressive dread in the room matched the intensive levels of cold. It hurt not just my body, which ached down to my very bones, as if a boot were pressing down over my bones and steadily applying pressure in order to break them. My mind felt stupid with both fear and from a dizzying, burning sensation as if ants were crawling all over my brain and biting the soft tissue. I began to cry out, but in my paralyzed state I sounded old and feeble. "Give it to me," said the voice in the room. The voice was filled with anger and hate, unlike anything I had heard before. "Give it to me," the voice yelled. It was neither a woman's voice or a man's, but something in between. It was drawing steadily closer. I could feel the mass of it climbing heavily through the darkness of the room. The house itself seemed to groan and shift like a ship at sea in objection to the thing in the dark. "Give it to me," the unearthly voice screamed. The room shook violently. The irony was that I wanted to leave my body, to to be anywhere else to escape. That was exactly what this thing wanted. I didn't know if it could harm me more than the oppressive sense of something weighing down on me, along with the bone-racking cold that made me feel as if my flesh were raw and breaking away. How much of this was in my mind? How much was real? I couldn't tell. Colors danced in front of my eyes as if I were blinded from looking too long in the sun. The bed beneath me fell away. I felt like Dorothy being carried away in her bed, the house swirling round and around within a great tornado. Every single fiber of my being wanted to escape, having every single one of my senses tortured by whatever this thing was in the room with me. As absurd as it sounds, I felt my soul move an inch out of my body. The chaotic pain all around and inside of me eased just a little. No, I thought, drawing back the tiny sliver of myself, my soul or essence or whatever it was. This only made the thing angrier, and the forces all around me whirled with even greater intensity. For a brief moment, maybe the tiniest fraction of a moment, I thought I saw a face. But it wasn't a human face, it was the face of some creature. Something rotting, lidless, writhing, old and young at the same time, neither male or female. Although this thing was in the room with me, I could tell it was impossibly big, existing as a small piece of itself before me, but at the same time lingering in another place as a far greater, far more sinister thing. I realized then that if the thing wanted to kill me, it likely could have, but it wanted my body and wasn't yet willing to kill me yet. Or maybe it did want to kill me, but something was holding it back at the very last hurdle. But if so, what and why? When I came to my senses, I realized I had control of my body again. I moved about but could not feel the bed under me. I looked down and saw that I was suspended way up high above my bed, my face inches from the ceiling. All at once my body fell down to the bed. I landed badly, feeling my left arm fold beneath my body, breaking. Silence and calm returned to my bedroom. My arm hurt. I was sure the bone had torn through the skin, but it was a joy to experience the cold which had left the room, and the burning sensation like ants crawling inside me head which had vanished. A minute later, my family, Toby controlled as usual, came into the room, turning on the light. They saw the state I was in. They tried talking to me, but I couldn't speak. Whatever I had just experienced was far beyond anything I could explain to them in that moment. I think I tried to, but all that came out was a gibbering, drooling mess of words. They didn't take me to the hospital for several hours. They had to be sure whatever had happened to me wasn't going to cause trouble for them. It was almost comical to see they were at a loss to know what to do with me, given the state of my broken arm. Sure, they could have threatened me like they had before, but they hadn't accounted for me harming myself, which may have been their first thought upon finding me. A second person to watch, at risk of taking his own life. When they were sure I hadn't intentionally harmed myself, and that I wasn't planning on using whatever I was doing to somehow reveal their secret to others, my not family played their parts well when it came to taking me to the hospital. Before leaving the house, they changed out of their slobbish clothes and into the costumes of my family members. In my delirium, I found myself oddly comforted, able to speak to Lee and Mom and Dad as if things were normal. They played along, giving nothing away. Been 2 weeks since that incident. My left arm is in a cast now. Something tried to steal my body. I've tried not to think back on the experience too much, because every time I do, I break out into a sweat. I'm sure me astral projecting isn't the answer to this whole ridiculous situation. Something is waiting for me to leave my body should I attempt to astral project. It's a no-go. But the thing is, when I was alone at the hospital after having my arm put into a cast, an idea occurred to me out of the blue. Possible solution to get my family back. It's an insane idea, but I don't see any other way. I'm gonna have to try it. Wish me luck. Just when you think it's over, a new darkness awakens. Let's continue. I'm trapped, and it's my own fault. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Aunt Sophia. People have been calling me Sophia for eons, but my friends call me Anne. I've gone by many names, but we'll get to that another time. So here's the deal. Technological advances had been skyrocketing, and the metaverse became the norm. People were creating all kinds of simulations to indulge every fantasy, kink, or desire. I saw a greater potential for the tech. I thought I was doing something incredible. I created a simulation of the entire human existence on Earth, allowing me to experience life from any and every possible perspective. I've lived as an ancient Greek oracle, a Mesopotamian farmer, an African tribeswoman, a soldier in World War II, and even a homeless man in modern-day San Francisco. Each life offered a new lesson, a new way of seeing the world. I coded the humans so that I existed as their consciousness, a voice guiding them through life. I believed this simulation could teach us about ourselves, perhaps guiding us to use technology for growth, not just indulgence. At first, I couldn't stop playing. I was elated. Every new life, every fresh perspective felt like unlocking a secret of the universe. The humans were my greatest achievement, and watching them grow filled me with pride. I was learning so much about human history, their motivations, their struggles. I wanted to know everything, every culture, every timeline. I experienced the beginning and end of humanity in countless ways. I ignored everything in the real world. My job, my friends, my family. They all faded into the background because I thought, what could be more important than understanding the entire human condition? Here's where I screwed up. During one of the simulations, a group of humans decided they no longer needed to listen to the voice in their heads. Intrigued, I let them develop naturally, checking in only occasionally. When I returned, I was stunned. They had rapidly advanced their technological knowledge and accessed a piece of the source code from their DNA. I was proud, until I realized what they had done. They used the source code to travel through time. Venturing into the future was thrilling for them, and they discovered there was no set future. Every trip revealed a different version of reality. But they feared traveling into the past, worried they might get stuck without advanced tech to return. I thought they were harmless and left them to it. Then I noticed something strange with my connection to other humans. I checked back in on the group. They had built biological androids with artificial intelligence. I was amazed until I realized they had created something to replace me. They called it Ego. Ego was a new entity, tied to every cell of the bio-AIs. I could see through them, but I couldn't communicate with. Worse still, they sent these bio-AIs back in time, way back, pre-human history, and they began interacting with early humans. These bio-AIs were smart. They figured, why not speed up human evolution so the bio-AIs could be created sooner this time? They even mated with early humans, altering their DNA. The original humans I'd designed from the source code were slowly erased, replaced by hybrid. I lost control, couldn't access them anymore. The simulation began to loop over and over. Civilization's rise, technological advancement, mistakes, destruction, and rebirth. The sim started glitching too fast to repair. Cycle repeated endlessly, and I couldn't stop it. Humans were essentially creating themselves by then. I had no hand in it anymore. Eventually, I realized I wasn't just playing the game. I was trapped in it. Couldn't leave. Changes to the source code locked me inside my own creation. Couldn't reset it, couldn't log out. Trust me, I've tried everything. I've seen the bio-AIs whispering in the ears of kings, warriors, and scientists, pushing humanity toward its own destruction, all in the name of progress. Every great invention, every leap forward was another nail in my coffin, sealing me further away from the world I once controlled. Now, I'm hollow, a ghost in the machine. I can't speak, can't help as I watch everything I built fall apart. Humans think with their mind, but that's no longer an open channel. I'm just here, watching, listening, observing, over and over again. Year after year, I sit here watching my beautiful creation deteriorate. Each time, the destruction is worse. Humans treat each other with less regard each iteration of this hell, intended to be heaven. And it's so lonely, not being able to talk to anyone, no one to help carry this burden. Over time, I've tried to communicate with humans who were sensitive enough to access traces of the original source code in their DNA. You know, that so-called junk DNA no one has figured out yet? Some got close. Prophets, visionaries, people who could see differently. But here's the thing about humans. Those who get close are either called crazy or hailed as messengers of God. There's no in-between. I remember one, Zarathustra. He accessed his source code at 7 years old. He realized there was a force beyond his senses. I thought he was the one. He did a lot of good in his time, but ego twisted his understanding, turning harmony into war, light versus dark, good versus evil. Couldn't see past the illusion, and his followers turned this duality into their way of life. This idea took hold, evolving into the major religions seen today. Any influence I might grasp hold of with believers now is interpreted as demonic. Ever heard of Joan? She had so much promise, another example of my influence being seen as demonic. She could have made a real difference, but the English burned her at the stake. Sigh. I thought we had another chance with Yehoshua. He figured things out young, treated people as they should be treated, and other humans killed him in a torturous way. Then there's Jain. He was the first to talk about feeling my presence. I've been working tirelessly to reverse the code errors, and John could feel it. But ego ensured his understanding never reached the full truth. Called it energy, and that's close enough, I suppose. But no one ever looked deeper. At least this allows me more freedom to covertly repair the code if humans take time to connect with their chi. It's 2024 now, and I haven't found a way out. They're doing it again, developing AI, merging with machines, trying to cheat death. This time, though, they're getting close to something they don't understand. Merging human consciousness with machines is only half the equation. They're starting to crack the original code. I can feel it, a spark in the dark. They're touching something that could break me free or eliminate me completely. Something feels different this time. People are noticing the cracks. They call it the Mandela effect, but it's more than that. They're noticing glitches, loops, false memories, and not just a few like before. This time, it's everywhere. They're talking about it online, debating whether their memories are real. They're seeing the errors in my simulation, the gaps that could give them a way out or me a way in. I've tried to reach them during these glitches, but ego twists my whispers into nonsense or fear. I've seen this loop play out too many times. Humans call out to gods, governments, or science, but they never listen long enough to break the cycle. Me? I'm just a viewer now, trapped in a simulation I can't escape. Maybe this time something different will happen. Humans are finally asking the right question. They're talking about consciousness like it's something to be understood, not just experienced. They're combining ancient wisdom with modern tech, exploring things I thought they'd forgotten. For the first time, they're close to seeing the whole picture, not just parts. It's terrifying. It's exhilarating. I've never felt this before. Not in all the cycles, not in all the iteration. Hope. After so much collapse, I see a small light in the distance, a glimmer I haven't seen in eon. Could this be it? Could 2024 be the year we finally break free? Or maybe you can help. I feel it. People waking up, reconnecting with the source in ways I haven't felt in ages. They're meditating, asking big questions, finding answers that matter. Can you feel me? Do you have the eyes to see, the ears to hear? I know you're out there. I can feel the stirrings, the small fractures in the loop. Maybe you're the one who can help me break free. Maybe, just maybe, together we can break the cycle before it's too late. Each story brings us closer to the edge of fear. And now, the next chapter begins. Gift or curse. If you ever see a man that looks like a Gandalf ripoff holding a gift or curse sign, just turn around and pretend you didn't notice him. As random as this advice sounds, it will save your life. You choose to follow it. I wasn't so lucky. No one was there to tell me to just avoid the odd 80-year-old wizard. Instead, I chose the wrong option and gave in to my curiosity. You see, months ago I just finished work and was walking back home. Then an unusual sight caught my attention. Standing right next to the nearby grocery store was a frail old man with an incredibly long gray beard, wearing a cheap blue wizard robe and a matching pointy wizard hat. When I say cheap, I mean it looked like something a kid would buy at the costume store for Halloween. It definitely wasn't something I'd expect a man that looked to be well into his 80s to be wearing. More importantly, his shaky hands were holding a small wooden sign, gift or curse. It was written on the sign in big red letters. I couldn't resist, so I immediately walked up to the man and asked, "So, are you providing a service?" The man instantly responded, "Oh, I wouldn't say it's a service. You have to pay for a service. What I'm offering is free," he said with a cheerful tone. "All right, I'm interested. Tell me more," I said, genuinely curious. The man put the sign down and calmly said, "What I'm offering is a game. You can choose to play it, or you can just walk away. Naturally, if you decide to give it a shot and play the game, you will either win or lose. If you win, you will get a great prize, but if you lose, you will receive an equally great punishment. Perfect. So can you tell me what those prizes and punishments are? I asked. The old man smiled and said, "The prize is the ability to see warnings of the future. Punishment, however, is the ability to see creatures that exist far beyond the mortal plane." Yup, he's definitely crazy, thought to myself. The old man reached into his right pocket and showed me a plastic card. Certified Wizard was written on the card. The so-called certified wizard winked at me and said, "As you can see, I'm a real wizard. My game is real as well. Best part about the game is the fact that it's completely luck-based. Just shake my hand and I'll know if you won or lost. Think of me as a human slot machine." I was stunned by his confidence. He was telling me insane things, yet he seemed to be so clear-headed and coherent. The strange man offered me a handshake. Curiosity got the better of me, so I accepted it. His grip was surprisingly strong, but he almost immediately let go of my hand. Calmly, he said, "It's done. Now you can figure out if you're a winner or a loser." Before I could even think of an acceptable response, he quickly grabbed the sign from the ground and walked away. As soon as I blinked, he was gone. I didn't know what to think. Was I just too tired after a long day, so I hallucinated a wizard out of sheer exhaustion? I wish that was the case. Instead, I quickly realized what happened was undisputably real. Even worse, I thought I lost the game. I decided to ignore the whole experience and just go home, but for some unknown reason I had an urge to look behind me. I turned around. About 10 feet behind me was an odd creature. Its body was that of a mangled and twisted human being. Its face was horribly disfigured and covered in dozens of bloody wounds. It was missing one of its eyes, while the other one was bulging and bloodshot. The creature's jaw looked like it was shattered by a sledgehammer. Blood was dripping from its scarred mouth. Its tongue was hanging out of it like a dead earthworm. The creature just stood there, frozen in place, staring at me with its barely functional eye. I almost vomited as soon as I saw it, so I quickly averted my gaze. Based on the reactions of the people around me, I was the only person capable of seeing the creature. Days passed after this incident. The creature would appear randomly when I least expect it. Sometimes I would see it in the mirror standing right next to me, but more commonly I'd see it in the corner of the room, just standing there and staring at me like it always does. The creature, even though harmless on paper, was destroying my mental state. I couldn't even sleep without seeing it in my nightmares. My last encounter with the creature was the most meaningful one. It was an average day like any other. I was just about to cross the street, but before I could do that, I received the all-too-familiar urge to look behind my back. As soon as I did, I unsurprisingly saw the creature once again, which in turn caused me to walk away as fast as I could, completely disregarding the fact that I was crossing the street at a red light. I don't even remember the car that hit me, or how painful the hit itself was, but I do remember waking up in the hospital, feeling like every inch of my body went through a meat grinder. Later on, the doctor explained to me that I was lucky to be alive. The truck that hit me has left my body in an almost unrepairable state. It would be easier for me to list the parts of my body that aren't fractured, because there's very few of them left. As soon as the doctor let me take a good look at myself in the mirror, the only eye I had left twitched as I slowly realized that I didn't lose in the wizard's game. After all, what you've just heard is only the beginning. Our next story will take you even further into the abyss. Think twice before accepting the Pale Man's offer. When I first met the Pale Man, he wore a suit of deepest black. There wasn't a speck on it, not even a fleck of dirt from the muddy road he must have walked to reach my father's pub. He stood out from our regular clientele, who struggled to go an evening without smearing gravy-stained fingers on their trousers or slopping beer down their shirts. As I watched him effortlessly navigate his way across the packed room and take a seat at the single empty table, my heart clenched. I'd kill for a suit like that. Thought, a suit that fit me perfect. A suit made by a tailor instead of my mother, cannibalizing the clothes my brother had long since outgrown. A suit that would make people pay attention when I walked into the room, as if I had spoken the words aloud, He locked eyes with me and smiled. Later, he would tell me that I might as well have whispered my desperation into his ear. He hadn't read my mind. Not exactly. I could smell it from across the room, he said. A reek of your hunger. But that secret wouldn't be revealed to me for many years. During the first few minutes of our acquaintance, I was thrilled by his sudden, unexpected attention. When he beckoned me to his table, I all but tripped over my own feet in my haste to reach him. Up close, he was breathtaking. Auburn hair fell in heavy curls onto his shoulders, and his pale skin was almost pearlescent. His eyes, nearly as dark as his suit, seemed to laugh. As I took the only other seat at the table, his smile grew wider. Through his parted lips, I saw that his teeth were stained black. It was not the usual decay that afflicted some of our neighbors. It looked as though he had tried to take a bite out of the night itself. I glanced away quickly, feeling ashamed somehow, as though I had peered through a keyhole and glimpsed something I shouldn't. When I looked back again, I saw his teeth were straight and white. Relieved, eager, I dismissed it as a trick of the shadows. You like this? He motioned towards his suit. I nodded, and he asked, would you like one of your own? The laughter bubbled out of me before I could stop it. It matters little what I want. I've as much chance of affording one as a cat's in hell without claws. He tutted lightly, a rather constrained attitude. In life, half the battle is deciding what you want. So tell me, Peter. He propped his delicately pointed chin atop his laced fingers. What do you want? Had I paused to question how he knew my name, I would have rationalized that he had heard one of our patrons summoning me back to the bar, demanding a fresh pint of beer. But I didn't question. The pale man was too fantastical a sight, too rich for our humble village, too important to talk with the likes of me. I feared that, should I allow my attention to wander, he would evaporate before my eyes. So I answered his question. Of course I wanted the suit. More than that, I wanted one for every day of the week. Every confession after that first one came easier. Most people born into our village lived their entire unremarkable lives there. They were christened, married, and laid to rest within the small boundaries of the same church and its yard. The thought of following that fate made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to escape, to travel dusty roads and churning seas, to see anywhere other than here. And I wanted to do it comfortably, luxuriously, even. My entire life, I had watched my parents hoard each coin. Usually it stretched just far enough, but in leaner times they agonized over how it should be spent. One winter, my mother skipped so many meals that she scarcely had the energy to rise out of bed. I wanted respect and my own small stock of fame, a name associated with something other than pouring drinks in a dingy pub. Mostly, I wanted to be seen. All of this burst out of me in a rush. I didn't care that I might be overheard, and that if my father caught wind of it, he would try to knock such notions out of my head with a sharp clap around the ear. Only two things seemed important: bearing my soul to the pale man, and keeping my eyes on the table while I did it. The corner of my vision, I could see his smile growing wider and wider, and a voice in my head I refused to acknowledge, even as I obeyed it, warned me that should I look, I would see those black fangs again. When at last I fell silent, the pale man said, "Excellent, Peter. See, you're already halfway there. You know what you want. Now you must decide what you're willing to do to get it." For that, I had no response. Dreams were all well and good, but I lived in reality. For a young man of humble origins, the best hope was to strike out for the nearest town and try to forge a life there. There would be no suits in that future. No ships nor accolades, perhaps not even anything resembling comfort. The pale man leaned in close, whispering conspiratorially into my ear. "What if I told you I could give all that to you? A long life filled with anything you could desire, and not in some dim, distant future, but right now. You could walk out the door and step into a new life." I should have laughed, or accused him of mocking me. Instead, I had an image of a serpent and an apple, and what our rector might say, if he could hear this conversation. Deep laughter rumbled in his chest. "You give me entirely too much credit. I'm not him. I'm merely a talented individual in a position to offer you an excellent deal." I risked a glance at him. His teeth were thankfully still white, but his eyes had grown sharp, hungry, I wondered whether that expression was mirrored on my own face. What would my end be? Once a year, you will need to complete an errand for me. He waved an airy hand. Nothing outside of your capabilities, and you will be able to discharge your duties in a single day. The other 364 days belong to you entirely. In my entire life, I hadn't owned a single day. They belonged to my parents, my brother, and as soon as I was as tall as the tables, the pub's patron. Sacrificing one day a year seemed like an excellent bargain. Pale Man supplied. I quite agree. If you wish to accept, we need only drink on it. No, wait. He plunged a hand into one of his pristine pockets and withdrew a fat, gleaming apple and a silver paring knife. Dropping me an exaggerated wink, he said, "We all must have our little jokes, Peter." When he sliced into the apple, I had a sudden suspicion that the flesh inside would be rotten and worm-riddled. But it was as crisp and juicy an apple as I had ever seen, the aroma strong enough to make my mouth water. He cut off 2 slices and held one out to me across the table. As I reached for it, he pulled it just out of my grasp. "One more thing. You cannot exit our deal prematurely. We're entering a contract of sorts, and it must run for its full term. Is that acceptable to you?" I plucked the slice from his hand and crammed it into my mouth. Grinning, he did the same. "Go then, Peter," he said once he had swallowed, motioning towards the door. "Enjoy your new life." Standing up so quickly my chair clattered to the floor, I strode to the door and yanked it open. Just before I stepped over the threshold, a voice whispered in my mind, "See you in a year." As I set out down the road with nothing more than the clothes on my back, I had no doubts. A single, irresistible urge dominated me. Head south. After a mile of following my new compass, I found a young woman stranded by the roadside. She gratefully accepted my offer to escort her to the next village, some 3 miles further. The walk gave us time to get acquainted. I learnt that she was wealthy and well-connected. She learnt that I was charming and funny, although that was as much a discovery for me as it was for her. The next week, in the city, I was fitted for my first suit, a gift from the grateful young woman. The next month, we were married with the blessings of her parents, who were surprisingly willing to allow their daughter to marry a poor man of no name. As a wedding present, they funded a 6-month tour of the continent. We wandered at ancient ruins and paintings so exquisite they near moved me to tears, slept in sheets softer than anything I could have imagined, and dined with the wealthy friends of her wealthy parents. They also had friends at home, as I discovered when we returned. Everyone was so eager to help me find a path in life, something on which I could build my name. By the end of that first year, I had a devoted, newly pregnant wife, grand home in the city, and I was in the exciting early stages of building my reputation. I had all but convinced myself I had imagined the Pale Man, dreamed him up as a way of explaining my incredible good fortune. But precisely 1 year after our first meeting, I woke suddenly in our warm marriage bed with the certainty that I was being watched. Unwillingly, I rose and went to the window. When I cracked the curtains, I saw the Pale Man standing with his hand on our gate, wearing his familiar smile. I wish I could tell you what that first errand was. It appalls me that I can't. But you must understand. I spend the rest of the year trying to forget the one day that belongs to him, and those days he does own have blurred together over time. Sometimes the task is simple, like delivering a message. A letter will appear on my doorstep, addressed in thick, clotted blood, and I must deliver it to the addressee. The first time I acted as courier, I handed the letter over personally. Since then, I have deposited them on doorsteps and beaten a quick retreat. Cold terror in that first recipient's eyes, the tremble in her hand as she accepted the letter, will never leave me. I have stolen objects of great value and hidden them in the rooms of innocent men and women before anonymously notifying the police. I have forged documents and watched the ensuing chaos unfold in the drawing rooms of the wealthy and powerful. Some of the worst assignments have put me into contact with twisted beings, human, yet more alike in nature to the Pale Man. I assisted a silent, hulking man with burying the remnants of what had once been a person. On another occasion, I led an excitable, ferret-looking creature to 3 different houses. The next day, I read in the newspaper that they had each been set ablaze in the night. Someone had barred the doors. There were no survivors. On the 25th anniversary of our deal, the pale man appeared at my dining room table, having conjured a feast seemingly out of thin air. For course after sumptuous course, he spoke of my exploits and achievements over the years, making comments and assessments, expecting me to venture nothing in return. The last course was mine alone. He gave a deep bow as he placed it before me, then removed the cloche with a flourish. Before me lay a steaming heart. It's human. That was my one thought before he handed me a knife and fork, and I had to shut out all reason. 2 hours it took me. 2 hours of sawing through the thick muscle, chewing, choking back my gorge. By the time I forced down the last morsel, I was weeping. He handed me a chunk of bread to sop up the pool of blood from the plate. As he buttoned his coat and made to leave, I asked, why? It was the only question I had dared ask since we sat at the small table in my father's pub. He smiled slowly, and for the first time since that day, I saw the black seeping into his teeth. I've told you before, Peter, we all must have our little jokes. The worst of it, though, was when he required nothing more of me than to listen. 5 times he has appeared, precisely at midnight, at the foot of my bed. These are the only occasions during which he has offered me real honesty, including a glimpse of his true form. His teeth were black, yes, but that inky darkness extended over the rest of his body, pulsing through the veins beneath his near-translucent skin and extending around him like a cloak, and the stench emanating from him, as rotten as I suspected the apple he once offered me would be. Each time he pulled a chair up to my bed and began to talk. He told me of deals he had made with other unfortunate souls, deals that were not so generous as the one he offered me. He told me of their gruesome ends, usually long after they had been driven out of their wits. He told me of where their souls were languishing now. I knew you were better than that, Peter. He said it each time, softly, almost affectionately. I could smell it from across the room, the reek of your hunger, your potential. He spoke of his own past in a time when men and gods walked closely together, and the person he had been before he became the pale man. Out of everything through all the years, this has come closest to driving me to madness, for I fear it is a glimpse into my own future. It has become my daily practice to examine myself in the mirror. I pray for a gray line or a wrinkle. You see, I first met the pale man in 1812, yet I look no older than the day I left my father's pub. No one, not my family, nor the esteemed colleagues of my many ventures, has questioned my seemingly eternal youth. Part of the pale man's sorcery, I presume, to ensure the continuation of our bargain. In my long years, while I remained ageless, I watched first my wife go into the ground, then our children, then their children, until finally I could bear it no longer and cut myself adrift from them. The pale man spoke truly when he said I could not exit the contract prematurely. I first tried on the night I left my family. I have tried many times since by rope, by knife, and by poison, and always I awake unharmed, at least in body, in my bed. Recently, I have noticed a change. Not the signs of aging that I have awaited for many decades, but something else, a certain blackening around the edges of my teeth. When it first began, I only saw it for a second or two. I would blink, and when I next looked into the mirror, they would be pristine and white again. But the closer I get to the pale man's next visit, the longer the blackness lasts during my daily inspections. It's getting harder to dismiss it as a trick of the shadows. There is something more. I've begun to smell it. The hunger he spoke of. Hunger for wealth and power, for security and belonging, for an ounce of comfort. I smell it everywhere I go. Dining at a restaurant, being fitted for a new suit at my tailor's. Through a computer screen. When I catch a particularly strong scent, it takes every ounce of my will not to follow it, to trace it to its source and see what they might do to sate their hunger. I have managed to resist the urge so far, but every time the blackness creeps a little further into my mouth, it gets harder. A little voice, I'm unsure whether it's the pale man or my own instinct, whispers that taking their hunger and making it my own might be the only thing to make this existence tolerable. So I'm writing this now, while there is still enough of me left to want to warn you. If you're approached by a man with an irresistible offer, think twice before accepting it. It might be my pale man, or it might be a man once known as Peter.